This is the Simpit. I'm your host, Shaun Cole, and welcome to Friday's edition of the Pit Stop, where I am joined by my good friends, Billy Strange and Brandon Waters. How you guys doing today?
Good. How are you guys?
I'm doing great.
Hi, guys, is good. Brandon's good. Everyone's great. Cool. Happy Friday, everybody out there. Happy March. It's March 1st, so I'm a little blown away by how fast this year is going along. Let's cross our fingers that the internet is working today as well. Let's hope on that. So I always turn to our audience, and on a Friday show, I like to ask, what are you guys doing? What are you driving? What's hot? I'm sure a lot of you out there playing Dirt Rally 2.0. That's certainly hot. What are you doing? What are you having fun? Are there leaderboards, things that we need to go after? Are there challenges in sim racing we need to know about to make our weekend better? And what about you, Billy? What have you been up to? What are you driving?
Well, I did play more Dirt Rally 2.0, but we've already covered that, so I'm not gonna beat a dead horse again.
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
I like it. It's good. It's a missed opportunity, I think, on their part. It reminds me a little of Project Cars, both games, and even Dirt 4. Not in the same way. It's a missed opportunity to launch in a stellar manner. So anyway, and then I had 3 projects that I worked on this week that I had to scrap. So that was fun.
It wasn't. I thought that was last week's.
You know what? It's because I can't stand it. I will, when I'm going through a project, I'll have an idea to do something, and then I'm sure you have, this is relatable for Shaun, is that I have a certain expectation on the quality when it's done that I expect from myself. And so when I'm showing off something that I think could be fun, which is what my Let's Drive something series is, it's usually to feature a car and track combo that I think is really fun. And maybe it's new, or maybe it's old and you just weren't aware of it, or maybe it's obscure and you just don't know about it. So that's what that series is supposed to do. It's supposed to highlight things, and if there's any information that I can give, I try to do that in the video. So I do research. It sounds silly, but I do research, and if the car needs to be set up, I set the car up, I go through all these parameters, and sometimes when I get to the actual recording of said show, it just falls apart. Like, I've done all this prep work and everything else, and then it's not good. It's just not good enough. So then I have to make the decision to keep trying to do it or cut the cord and move on to the next one. And it's usually, I've had enough of this today. I just kill it and move on.
Let me just put it over there for a while. We'll not think about it and see if we have to come back to that or not.
And usually I don't come back to it. So that's another thing.
Yeah, if it got you to walk away.
But one of those was NASCAR Thunder 2003 for the PC.
Whoa.
Right?
Yeah.
So how that came about was I wanted to do a race for Atlanta because the Cup cars were at Atlanta last week. And I knew iRacing was coming out with their build. I had assumed, hopefully, that they were coming out with AI, and that didn't happen. And I didn't have enough time to practice to go run a multiplayer race, because I'm just not going to jump into a multiplayer race and not practice, because that's probably an ego thing. But anyway, so I got NASCAR Racing 2003, which I mentioned last week. It stopped working. So then I found eSports NASCAR Thunder 2003. I'm like, I should just try this. I had 2004, 2003, and it's on the PC. I got the 03 version to work. I am severely impressed with the handling and physics model in that game. The only thing that makes it on the arcade side is the brakes. The brakes are too good.
Okay.
But at Atlanta, you're not using the brakes. You're just rolling the car. And I was driving it just like iRacing, and it felt a very simplified version. But it felt like, I was like, what in the hell? It has so many options for setup. I was completely blown away.
So that game, by memory, that goes back to when they still had a lot of fun factor in the game, right? It's a radio voice, cool. And announcer guy and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Oh, see, I wish they'd go back to some of that more. over the
had these
top
overlays. Yeah,
you
they
know.
had these overlays and a grid walkthrough in the beginning, and they had announcers that kind of gave a little history of the track or what you could expect. So there's a presentation to it that was really cool, and that's as I was playing it, I'm like, I got to show this, but the AI ruins it. Like the AI is just irritating. But that is the reason I got into that series was I used to play it on the PlayStation 2, and I had no idea, how, lack of a better term, more realistic than an arcade racer was because I was playing it with the gamepad, and I'm going through it. I was like, I don't remember all these setup options. I don't remember that I could control the temperature and the weather, and all. I was like, was it really like this?
And you're like, here we are today in 2019 acting like that's new stuff, right?
And that's what blew me away. I mean, you can't adjust the FOV and you can't adjust your seat and that kind of stuff. But I was completely dumbfounded that this game was, I expected it from NASCAR Racing 2003. Obviously, that's a more in-depth title than this. But anyway, yeah, I wanted to make a video on it because I was so surprised, but the AI ruined it for me. So I was just like, yeah, I'm over it.
How did 15-year-old graphics hold up?
It's not bad. I mean, it obviously has pop-in texture issues and that kind of thing. The lighting for their surface reflections, the lighting gives this like super glossy, which if you know race cars really aren't glossy typically. So, but it has this like super glossy like sheen to the car.
Right.
I mean, what?
Like the cars always look like Daytona at night, where it's like brighter than daylight with the and
like
it's all directed right on the car,
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was decent level of detail. I mean, it actually looked pretty good in considering that it's a 2003 game. So
sure.
That was fun until it wasn't. And then I did put out a video in Assetto Corsa. I reworked the AI lines at Adelaide and gained like over 3 seconds for the Australian supercars, and then I did a video with the Australian supercars in AC with Adelaide, which is a mod. Both are mods.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the video the one video I got out this week.
You're doing a very good job of really getting all over the place though. And trying a huge variety of different things in sim racing right now, it seems, over the last few months.
I'm just having a lot of fun with trying to come up with things in the real world that inspire me to drive the cars. And I find that right now I'm having much more fun doing that than focusing on a specific thing to do. In other words, a specific multiplayer race or something like that. This way, I have the ability to control what I'm driving, not somebody else dictating what I'm driving, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So while I would like to jump into a race with these cars in a multiplayer race because it would be fun, the reality is that's not going to happen.
No.
So I have to, and so that's why I kind of nerd out and go into changing the AI lines and stuff like that. I mean, it made for a much more entertaining race for me, and and then I give out the files on my Discord so that people can put them in theirs, and people seem to be enjoying it. So that's what I've been doing.
That's a lot. How about you, Brandon?
Oh, well, we've got a little race coming up this weekend that I've been trying to get ready for.
A little race.
But we're kind of both sides of the spectrum as far as we're software nerds as far as, oh yeah, we love doing this and it's got these features and stuff, but we're also hardware guys in that respect. And I had the opportunity to pick up some new hardware, and so if anybody ever asked me advice, what would you do to get ready for an endurance race or for any sort of big event, would be, hey, don't make a big hardware change right before you've got something coming up, and a week before
I had to put our buddy Chris Phillips on probation and cut him off. No new hardware until the race is over, buddy. Yeah. What do you?
I'm in the doghouse with Chris because I put new HPP pedals on my rig, so got the HPP 3 pedal set, and I've been going through trying to get those all configured and set up, and I wanted to wait, but I couldn't. They're so pretty.
Oh, is it gonna hurt or help?
So far, I think it's going to help. It was, I'm not used to running on this level of equipment, so the calibration was a little different than what I'm used to. I came from Fanatec V3Is, so um, I wasn't aware of like DI view and some of the limitations of Windows calibration, so I ran into some issues that way, just not being familiar with this type of stuff. And I think I finally got that figured out, and now it feels it. I hope that it's not placebo and that I'm actually seeing an improvement, but modulation, brake wise, it almost feels night and day difference.
Yeah.
Nice.
I can tell you, of all the hardware in the world to adjust to, that is probably one of the, physically side, the getting them calibrated and everything working, that's a different story. But under your feet, I think those are pretty easy to adjust to pedals. I didn't have a hard time adjusting to that brand of pedal as well.
Yeah, so I don't know.
At adjusting to a brake pedal.
These things showed up, and for me, it was like being a kid at Christmas and getting the exact toy that you asked for, and then trying to convince yourself, you know what, I'm not going to play with that for a whole week. It just couldn't be done. So
yeah. Sim Experience mentioning or reminding people DI view doesn't have an effect on iRacing, correct? Because iRacing uses raw data. Cool. Anything else? So it's been the little race we're preparing for and hardware for you.
Yeah, and with the hardware, whereas yes, Sim Experience, or I'm assuming that's Darren. I didn't have a problem in iRacing. iRacing was fine. It calibrated properly, and it's all about, when you do your pedal calibration. I did that about, 50 times, trying to make sure that I got it all right. It felt right, and I wasn't locking up oddly. But the only sims I really had an issue with was both Assetto platforms, so the original AC and then ACC. And then Dirt Rally gave me some fits also, but it's pretty dated title at this point, so I can see that. But once I got those sorted, it's just been a blast.
Yeah, I think one thing I say as a reviewer when it comes to high-end gear, the minute you get more complicated than just like a Logitech G29, it becomes more complicated. Like just and not that everything is more complicated, but it's like, okay, so here's the industry standard, and it's going to be plug and play on everything you do, G29. But the minute you start getting into load cells, hydraulics, more than one peripheral, even in some cases, in games that don't want to support multiple.
That's the thing that blows me away is, again, the Thunder game, you could plug in two peripherals. So I plugged in my pedals separate and my wheels separate. And then for a while there, we were getting all these games at one.
Right.
You only got one. How did we go backwards?
Yeah, I don't understand how it hasn't just become endless. Like, who cares?
Right.
Windows doesn't care, so why do the games care?
Don't understand that. So it's, to Brandon's point, and your point, it's nice. I think we're in a spot now that it's a little more accepted that people are running separate inputs and devices that are not just a Logitech. So we have more and more. I think more and more sims are coming equipped to be able to handle those peripherals.
Absolutely. So before we move on, just because I like to do this, it just occurred to me when Billy was talking about playing Thunder and running in Atlanta, so has real life racing started to influence what you want to do in sim racing? Because now, NASCAR's underway. Formula One, we're getting testing results. IndyCar's doing some testing. So you're starting to hear about your favorite series in the news and where they are. And does that make you want to fire up certain titles or combinations?
Yeah, I would say it does. I mean, for me, I think that's actually English is hard. Thank you. It's been more inspiring, and like I said, I've been having more fun. Just the fun factor that I've had putting together. I mean, yes, I get frustrated that I can't put some of these videos out and show people what I was trying to accomplish, but on the opposite end of it, I really have been enjoying, hey, they're going to Las Vegas this week. And so I've been messing with rFactor 2 and getting, trying to put a race together for rFactor 2 with the stock cars. I did Adelaide this week. And I don't know. I'm having a lot of fun being inspired by the real world stuff. And then seeing, I mean, I went to the nerdy lengths. I'm not kidding. I went to the nerdy lengths in the AC race of literally assigning it with Content Manager. You can assign every car that you want in by skin. And then you can assign their difficulty level. So I went through last year's results and literally gave each driver their difficulty level from 100 being, you know, the guys that were up front to the guys that were in the back, you know, somewhere down in the like high 80s or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Like I literally went to, but it turned out cool. Like I enjoyed seeing what AC then said, okay, you've given me these parameters and now you've changed the lines and now they're running really fast. I can't hardly keep up with them at 100%. And here's what they're doing. And it's so to me, it's interesting to see how that all plays out because I have an effect on what was going on with the actual sim itself.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's again, having that real life parallel that is a big part of what we get to do. I like when I start hearing Formula One results right now, I'm like, oh, how am I gonna best emulate that if that's what I want to get my next fix for? You know, and that's almost a loaded question to the audience. It's like for all you Formula One fanatics, and I know many of us are, how do you get your best Formula One fix? Is it just a no-brainer to say F1 2018, or is that like, you know, saying go get your fix of NASCAR with NASCAR Heat 3? Where, boom, where is it? Yeah. Where is it? Damn it, I promise, you know what, shots fired. I will have it by the... Earmuffs. I will have it by the next one. If we're going to step on toes, we might as well demonetize with some illegal shots fired clip. That's funny. All right.
I find I'm not a huge modern F1 fan. I enjoy watching the races every once in a while, but I'm not as fanatical as I was when we had the V10 cars or back in the late 80s and early 90s. Even I wasn't around in the late 70s, but I love the late 70s cars. So I'm not, I prefer like to go back in time with those specific situations when they come about.
Sure.
So I know I like going to, even though it's not official content, Automobilist has, to me, some of the best handling F1 cars there is.
You know, that would be a whole other show. What is the true golden era of racing? You know, I actually...
that would be hard.
And what's really funny, I mean, not that I want to go down that path right now. You already hit upon it. But mid-'80s, what was that? That was the infamous Group B rally cars.
Oh, I love... Oh, God. And the Group C.
And the Group C, the Jag, the Silk Cut Jag, and the
GTO and... GTP and yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken... And what's really funny about that era to me is that's when... cars on the road had not had a horsepower boom at all. Like a big V8 was only making 200 horsepower in 1986. You know, and yet all of the racing were in the monster turbos and the deadly horsepower. That's the thing. I mean, and it was an exciting and very dangerous era in racing, the mid 80s across the board, because it was true in every type of racing right then. Anyway, okay, Brandon, how much is real life influencing you?
I would say quite a bit, just because of the atmosphere of what's going on around everything. So we've got stuff like Sebring, you know, and obviously Daytona before that. So that kind of gets me excited for those events. And actually, even to some extent, like Billy's video that he did, you know, on the supercars this week, I watched that, and I think it was one of his last ones, kind of prompted me. I was pushing for SRS to have a season of supercars, and that just, I love that type of racing anyway. But and that's probably would be on one of my top 10 lists, is to make a supercar race or two. I agree. Check out the mountain or something. Oh man, that'd be fantastic. But I think it's quite a bit. And as far as what you guys were just talking about, I think it's relative. You know what I mean? Unless we want to say this for another week, but I think it's relative because depending on your age, what you're exposed to, like, you know, you brought up the rally example, and yes, I respect and, you know, admire those cars, the group, you know, C's and B's for what they were. And then I look and go, okay, well, to me, when I had my exposure to rally and my, you know, years where I was really moldable, that thing was the Colin McRae, you know, Carlos Sainz, Nicky Griss, which to me, for what I have seen of rally being in the U.S., that was when I had the most exposure. It seemed to be really popular. You know, it was all over TV. We had Speed Channel at the time.
I agree.
You know,
so we had games come out too that started featuring those cars, and I think that helped me in my passion for the Subaru. I mean, for a long time, I wanted the 22. The Subaru was like the thing that I wanted because, say what you will about the simulation part of Gran Turismo, but it exposed me to cars that I was not familiar with. So like the GTR, you know, the R32s, 33s, and 34s, like it exposed me to those things. So yeah, I totally understand.
Yeah, and GT was really good at that, you know, and it's like, I probably would have never known about a Tommy Mackinnon edition Lancer, you know, unless it was for Gran Turismo. So just because of stuff we didn't get here, you know, and I'd still probably do unspeakable things for a Mint 22B Subaru, you know. So it's like, yeah, it's just really cool in regards to how that influences us for later on in life. And I think it's relative because I think kids that are around nowadays, that if they're, you know, say they are exposed to racing and they're fans of it, well, technology is prevalent in what we do. We've got electric cars, you know, stuff like that. You know, electronic assists are everywhere.
Right.
So I think they'll really identify with Formula One now and driver aids and traction control and mapping and all that stuff that we didn't have to do. Because for me, the disconnect when it really kind of started to separate was when electronics became prevalent. You know, because to me, a Formula One car is like a kart that any of us can go get, just on steroids, you know, turned up to 11. So
it goes to 11.
As to the donation kicker there, thank you there, Scuderia Bazzani. Thank you very much.
Very nice of you.
And it says,
very nice.
And the compliment was even greater with the saying it's the best show on the planet. I appreciate that.
I'll take whatever I can get. Well,
so,
I think you see, to your point real quick, Brandon, I think you see that emulating the best in NASCAR right now, right? You have different eras of NASCAR, and people that revel in the quote unquote golden age to them is now somewhere lies in the 90s to maybe early 2000s, when arguably NASCAR was at its peak. And now you have a different generation of people that don't care about Bill Elliott being able to come from 2 laps down in the, what was it, the mid 80s, and then a lap or 2 down, and then come back to win the race. They don't want stuff like that anymore. They want stuff that people are running side by side, back and forth, they're passing all the time. And my favorite quote I heard, I listened to the Dale Jr. podcast, and sometimes it is awesome. Like the stuff he has on there is really good because it's really good insight, especially if you're a racing fan, not just a NASCAR fan, but he does go into NASCAR. But he's having a conversation with Tony Stewart, and they take this sound bite from one of his interviews. He's all, you want to talk about passing, right? He's all, well, we don't need racing for that. We can go out and we can get on the freeway and we can pass each other all day long. He's all, we're talking about racing. Racing is not just passing, it's racing. You want passing, we'll go out on the freeway and do that. And I thought that was a really good point, that it's not just about passing.
It's not just seeing 2 cars do this, you know.
Yeah, it's about the strategy. It's about the mental toughness of the driver, and when you're working with a pit crew, you know, no mistakes, that kind of thing. And so it's not just one thing. But I think that's the dichotomy in generations, like Brandon's speaking to, is you have a generation that grew up different, and now they expect a different package, which NASCAR is having a really, really hard time adapting to. And they're not making the right moves.
Ba-boom! Ba-boom!
Tangent. Sorry.
Tangent. No, it's good. It's a great point. I'm glad you're able to see what I was speaking to. But Shaun, did we go over what you've been up to?
No, I don't think we did. Wow. Technically, we barely started the show. What have I been up to? This has been an interesting week. I talked a lot about it on Monday, so we don't have to, I mean, if people have questions, I'm willing to answer. I did a Lucky Dog race. I ran in a 1990 Volvo 240 Turbo, and we were plagued by problems for 22 of the 24 hours of the race. There was 2 hours of heaven as far as the car is concerned, as good as that car can get, I should say, that I got to drive in the middle of the night. That was really cool and exciting. And it was a really fun race, and the only time I've ever done a real-life 24-hour race. So it was a real mind blow. And it was a bucket list item. So we were talking bucket list items like going and seeing supercars someday somewhere. Just being involved in a reel. I mean, no, it wasn't the Rolex 24. This is the Lucky Dog Button Willow 24. but it was a 24-hour race, and it was really cool. So that was the main occupant of my latest. Like you mentioned, we had that little race. I've been doing some driver coaching at Sebring. I've been preparing for Sebring. And then, I'm losing my mind. Let's see, it was already 2 nights ago. Today's Friday, yeah. 2 nights ago, I actually participated in the Lionheart All-Star race at Rockingham in the IndyCar, which, I'm playing the clip here. You guys can see it. It was really interesting. It wasn't planned on being a shootout type race, but the way the race played out, it became, man, if you made a mistake, you just retired, because that was the kind of race it turned into. And one by one, people were dropping. So by the 20 to go, we were down to only 5 cars running. But it kind of made it interesting. It was like nobody had planned it that way, but the way it played out made it kind of fun in a weird way. Because again, you'd fight as hard as you could, but if you made a mistake and it broke the draft or hurt your car, you just called it a night. And anyway, I ended up 10 to go. I did a really poor move of crisscrossing the arrow coming out of 2 and just lost all my front wing and went into the wall, and then I retired, and then there were 4. So yeah, it was a really, and then I can't even remember, I've lost my mind this week, but the race went on to where literally on the last lap the guy leading ran out of fuel. So let me try to get the...
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I think it was Michael Goodman won, and Justin Weaver was leading until, his car quit. And what's really amazing, I got to give credit where credit is due. Richie Hearn was on the reel, I believe it was on Global Sim Racing Channel that it was being aired. He called that, well in advance. He's like, oh, he's not going to make it on fuel. And he made it within 3/4 of a lap of on fuel. And I'm like, how did Richie, not being in the car, even know that? It was pretty amazing. Anyway, it was a really fun race. It was the kickoff to their season. So in 2 weeks, we start for real in the IndyCar series. So I'm looking forward to that. And it'll be fun running with the Lionheart guys. Sage Karam was there. He led. That guy, man, that guy is fast. And
you watched the way he was running his line. Go ahead, Brent. Sorry.
I was going to say, where did he finish in relative to you, Shaun?
6th. He finished 6th. I finished 5th. He crashed that much sooner than me.
When you watch that race and you watch the lines that Sage is taking and how he could manipulate the car next to the, as they're going through the corner, the other car.
Right.
And when he would pass on the outside, you could tell that he was more concerned about momentum versus anything else. And I've had a bunch of people, since I've put out a couple oval videos, ask, especially road course guys that aren't familiar with oval racing, what are the ins and outs? And that's the biggest thing. You cannot break your momentum. Do everything possible not to break that momentum you have. Use the brake as little as possible, and then keep that momentum up. It's like running a low, how I related it was like running a low horsepower road racing car. You got to keep that thing rolling through the corner.
Yeah.
So it was impressive to see how he was trying to manipulate his way back through the field.
I found that I was fast, and I was good at taking care of my car and my tires, and I couldn't pass anybody. It was like the minute we got side by side, I just couldn't. I could run the high line alone, I could run the low line alone, but I couldn't run side by side without just giving up all of my speed. And I was like, oh, this is just killing me, because I felt really quick. So yeah, I mean, my whole game plan from the drop of the green was just attrition. I'm like, this is a nasty track. This is really nasty. It's going to get ugly out there. And everybody actually ran way better than I thought it was going to be run. I thought it was just knowing the track and car combo. I thought it would be wicked. And the guys were really, really good. But one by one, everyone dropped. And 5th place. I was actually pretty proud. 5th place. That's a really good way for me to start off an IndyCar season when I haven't been in that car in years at this point. So that's cool. And that is what I did this week.
So it was fun to watch.
I don't know if I want to ask it. Well, I'm going to ask this question now. The hell with it. You had mentioned earlier in the week when you talked extensively about the Lucky Dog race. And if you didn't, that's a very interesting discussion. So go watch that. But you had hinted on things that you realized racing this time that you weren't aware sim racing either taught you or prepared you with. So you didn't really say what those were. So I thought it'd be interesting for a minute to talk about what was it that sim racing you feel like prepared you for or whatnot.
You know, it's weird how much I came away from, because if I think back, every time I've ever been in a real life car, which started back in like 2002, was the first time I ever saw a racetrack of any kind, whether it was kart or I was already sim racing, obviously. So I've never driven a real car without being a sim racer first. And here we are, 17 years later, and coming off of that weekend, I had more realizations of the parallels and the overlap than I ever had before. And the biggest reason is because I had to do that stint at night, where there's not a light on this track. It was good visibility out there, and we had decent, well, I only had one headlight.
Yeah, you had one, and it was winking the whole time.
I'm like, we had decent light. No, we had crap lighting.
I could only see the right-hand turn.
But what I realized, like, I've always said, oh, you can learn a track so well in sim racing. Well, foolishly, and that's a whole other conversation that I talk about personal stuff, like how to focus on the most important things in life. I could have turned laps at the track to get some awareness for the track, and I didn't, which was a mistake on my part. But with that said, what I didn't realize that we're learning, it's not just learning tracks, but we are learning how to learn tracks and learn them very quickly. And where you could have a driver who could probably spend as much as an hour on a racetrack and still not have total awareness. Like if he came in and someone debriefed him, he'd still have vague recollection of the exact layout of the track. And I'm just thinking, man, every sim racer, give them 5 laps, and chances are they know the track. So we've learned this skill of learning the tracks very quickly, number 1. Number 2, not just the track, but the braking zones. So your first time around, sure, you know the layout, but the second time around, you're already working on your braking zones. And how far in can you go before it's sketchy. And you're still observing the track in this 5-lap process. And then the last thing I'm going to get to that it really blew me away. I mean, there's the other obvious stuff. Learning the track, basic handling skills, sure, we talk about that every day. Race etiquette, we learn that every day. I think I'm a really safe guy on track. I'm aware of my surroundings. I know how to give way when I want to give way and how to make it really clear without doing something crazy or stupid. But what really came to me was, and I did mention this on Monday's conversation, when I was driving in the dark, didn't matter if you knew the track. I mean, it really kind of didn't. You couldn't see at all, so you needed to know when the rights were coming, but you had no visual indicators at all to work, not one.
Yeah, if you've never been to that track, it is where it's located. There's the pits, it kind of the track horseshoes around the pits a bit, and there's nothing out there. There's a row of trees on one side, when you're close to the pits, and that's it. So there's not even braking markers. There's hardly anything, even trackside. And I think the only thing when I raced there, a few corners had apexing cones.
Right.
I don't even know if you guys had that.
Well, oh.
We had some apexing cones in only a few of the corners. And which direction did you guys run in? Did you guys run clockwise or counter?
Clockwise.
So you went left down the front straightaway to that.
Yes.
The sharp. Okay, that's the way we ran in the karts. And the track's very deceiving because even from standing pit side, the track looks fairly flat. It looks like there's not a whole lot to the track. And so I can only imagine going out there with one headlight and it being dark. And because there's not a lot of reference points to that track. And did you guys, when you went on the one side where there's a bank turn?
Yeah, Riverside.
Okay. So did you guys do all the way, or did you do the short?
All the way. We did the longest version of this course there is, the full.
So we were not allowed to go all the way down to the end,
right,
and do that bank turn. We had to do the turn in earlier. But even then, you come out and you basically come out right to those S's, which I think are so fun.
Oh my god,
those are so cool.
This track,
it's a great track.
It is a great racetrack. It is so much fun to drive, and it has so many distinct sections where, like, the whole beginning section is very cambered and a lot of elevation change and kind of windy, and you don't get up to speed. And then from Grapevine through the bus stop, depending on your car, through the truck stop, through Riverside. I have the map up on the screen here. You're almost wide open. I mean, maybe just a hint of a lift here and there for confidence. But in a good car, chances are you are flat out from Grapevine all the way to setting up Phil Hill, which even Phil Hill is only a confidence touch of the brake. And it's a really, really fun track. At night, so what I realized about what we learn, and maybe this comes with real life experience too. I'm sure you were kind of talking about an outlaw. You learn the timing. Forget what you see and knowing the layout and using the visuals for turn-in. You learn the rhythm like a song, and it's like there is a beat to the track that we sim racers are absorbing subconsciously so much faster. When I got out there at night, I saw guys like hitting the brakes and then getting off the brakes and then back on the brakes, and I'm like, he doesn't know where he is. He forgot the timing.
That guy.
Yeah, and I did that too. I can't act like I didn't do that. But after 5-10 laps at night, I was able to start pushing as though it was the day on just nothing but my memory and that timing issue and confidence in my skills as well, which comes from sim racing. So yeah, it was really, really cool. I think we take for granted some of the skills we're developing that go beyond the obvious.
So I've got a question for you guys, because Billy, you definitely have input on this too, but this kind of reminds me of, I come from a motorcycle background, and I've done some race schools over the years, and one in particular that I'm going to refer to was a guy called Keith Code, and really popular American racer. I had this superbike school, and he used to teach this principle that you'd have $1 worth of processing power, right? And so your brain's capable of focusing on this $1 worth of information, and that every little thing that you're trying to pick up spends cents of that dollar. So your braking marker is 10 cents, and your apex is another 5. Debris on the track is 15. And so eventually you get to the point where you're overwhelmed, or you have less that you can spend to that. Do you guys think that sim racing helps lessen that impact of those cents that you're spending because of a familiarity with driving a car at pace, or the skills it teaches you to pick up those little things like your braking point, to where it's a second nature thing, or your apex, or just a general flow of running a car at speed?
I can tell. Two-part answer. I can tell you that what Sean's saying is I started racing RC cars when I was 5 years old. And then when we were able to afford a Nintendo, we started getting racing games on the Nintendo, and it progressed from there to Super, all the way, then PlayStation. I believe all those things helped me to, when I stepped into a sprint car, retain things easier and allow me to absorb more information quicker than maybe somebody else, because I had that built-in process of how do I learn the track and how do I get quick at, how do I ramp up my speed fast. And so when I raced the sprint car, it was overwhelming. You want to talk about something that completely bombards your senses. It's not like running on an asphalt tarmac track. You're constantly all over the place. The car's constantly trying to get away from you. Not only that, you're pulling tear-offs, you're getting sprayed with mud, your head's slamming against the seat, the car's dipping going in the corner. One lap there's a hole, one lap there wasn't a hole there. The next lap you go to run the same line and there's a hole going in the corner. The car bounces and takes off on you. And so there's so much going on with a dirt track in that regard that I do think all my experience through RC cars, slot car racing, racing on consoles, and then starting, doing a little bit of sim racing. I didn't really get into sim racing hardcore until later, but I did have some experience with it. I think that all mentally prepares you for all these different possibilities that could come at you.
Yep.
And then when I went from running the sprint car to running on road courses, I had two things going for me. A, nothing scared me because the sprint car is probably one of the most scary things you could possibly do. B, by that time, I did have some sim racing experience. So I understood apexing better. I understood how to absorb track limits better, what I should be aware of. And in a relatively short time, I was starting to win on the big road courses with the karts. And it was mainly because of those two things. You talk about the bombardment of information and, spending what dollar limit you have as far as concentration wise. Well, those are things that sim racing teaches you. Sim racing teaches you to concentrate. Sim racing teaches you to absorb the abnormal when it comes at you. So I think it all plays into itself. It's not just learning the track, like Shaun said. It plays a much broader role. Sure, you're not going to get the sensations that you would in a real car. But I think, to Brandon's point, I keep touching the damn filter. You go along and you just understand that there are more things that could come at you that you may not be aware of, and so you learn to adapt to those fairly quick, I think.
I think you also learn to filter things out, because even though they might be different distractions, when we're in our homes, we get just, noises, friends, family, dogs, whatever. And you kind of learn to deal with these things while racing, unfortunately. Well, so when you get in a situation like a sprint car where somebody might be so focused on the pelting of their helmet by dirt clods and rocks that they're not focused as much on driving. Getting back to Brandon's dollar bill analogy, it's like the dollar bill's already been spent and you're still worried about this shit, and meanwhile you need to be worried about this stuff.
Yeah, well, and it comes at you so fast that you need to block that stuff out. Like, I've had rocks go down behind my back and get wedge in between my shoulder blade and the seat, just because of how you're sitting in the car. Even though you're strapped in, you're still going to have gaps. And so, or, being extremely uncomfortable in the car, that kind of thing. And you get to the point where it slows down. It doesn't distract you as much. And that dollar can be spent so much more on other things, like focusing on your line, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, goes back to sim racing, I think.
I think that was Keith Code's point of the whole thing, was that, the more you can lessen that, and allow that focus to reshift, then you can really use it to gain speed at the track, and it's when you spend over that dollar is when it gets you in trouble.
Sure. I think how it also it all played out. So turn 1, if you're looking at this map, that flat straightaway, we go that way, and then we make that left in Sunrise. Coming down into off ramp, it's a little weird and downhill and kind of changing direction. And I was locking my brakes up so badly there, and I had one moment where I locked them up to the point where I lost, like, literally I was getting no traction. So I'm like, holy crap, I'm gonna go off the track. And anyway, I had the common sense to get off the brakes and maintain grip instead of, at first I was locked up with the wheels turned even, and I'm just going straight. I'm like, oh, it's a wreck.
The front end.
And I think that a lot of people with less experience, Max, can you please stop?
Max is spending his dollar.
That's right. That is all dollar in
all
one
that
spot.
distraction. He needs to learn. But yeah, I had the sense to get off of it. But more importantly, the next time around, I came in there looking to make a correction. Versus, I think a lot of people would still be like trying to wipe
Doing the
themselves.
same thing.
Or
Right.
or they'd be afraid of that corner because they almost had a bad time.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're so fearful of that corner, and I'm like, no. Back it up 10 feet, right? 10 feet. Not 100 feet, 10 feet. 10 feet should do. Just don't stab it as hard, dummy.
Right.
And I did have trouble there all day because we had a car that was prone to front lockup. And anyway, and then the other thing I was going to say, funny story. Sorry, we're never going to get to the news. Forget the news. So I had this moment. So we, and the other thing I'm going to say, little things that we're learning to do that other less experienced drivers, we're very accustomed to a push to talk button. So when you get in one of these moments where you're in a car that has radios and your crew's trying to talk to you,
Right.
well, I'm very versed at sitting there and blabbing away while holding a button while driving. It was no trouble at all. I'm cruising through Riverside at about 100 on a sideways corner, and I'm just blabbing away, telling jokes. I'm like, when the car was giving me trouble, I was like, well, I hope this is just an appetizer for the real meal to come later. And it's like, and just blab, but we hone our skills, man. I did have one more moment that was really funny, though. We have a drink bottle, so we all have our own straw.
Uh-huh.
And you slip it under your thing, and you bite down like a
Yes.
Camelback. Max, how do you not have a headache? I do. So I grab my drink tube, I take a drink, I put it down. A couple seconds later, maybe minutes later, because I forgot about the drink tube, there's something crawling on my lips. And I'm like driving in the night, going full speed, and there's something touching me like all over, and I'm like, what the and I'm like trying to get a glove. And it's like, it's hard to get a glove in that gap between, And so I'm trying to drive and do this and kill whatever, because I'm convinced at this point that it's like a praying mantis, because it was the way it was like all reached out and touching me and moving. And
Shaun's all, we're not mating.
Lionheart coming in. Thank you, Lionheart. Thank you very much for the donation. Anyway, I killed it and continued driving. And then later on that night, I'm putting Chris in the car, and I'm looking down, and oh my God, there were all these leaves that were like down in the left side, like door jam.
Oh, was it a leaf?
Like big old oak leaf. I think they're like oak leaves where they like kind of reach out like this.
He's like, it's an alien.
And when I was switching our tubes, one had stuck to my wet thing. It was a fucking leaf, dude. I was losing my mind thinking I'd been attacked by a praying mantis.
All right, I have one quick story, and then we can move on. I was leading a heat race one time, and I have a little bit of a problem with my jaw, or I used to. I don't have it anymore, but my jaw would actually come out of socket
while driving.
So I'm, in general, I like when I was playing in bands, I was the front man. I was singing. I actually had it come out one time while I was in the middle of me singing.
Wow.
And it's not painful, but it's very uncomfortable. It's a weird feeling. And so the only way I could get my jaw to go back in was to kind of massage and push at the same time, and then it would pop back in. Well, I was racing the sprint car. I was out in the lead of a heat race, and about 6 laps in, my jaw pops out while I'm running. There's no way I can fix that. You want to talk about distraction. Trying to focus on running the car hard through the corner while you're leading. You don't want the excuse of, well, my jaw came out, that's why I didn't win. And so, you know, you just kind of like, okay, well, I guess this is how it's going to be. And as I'm coming to the checkered flag, all of a sudden my jaw pops back in all on its own.
Whoa.
It was one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had racing in real life. I'm just, you know, you're hammering through the corner, the car's bouncing all over the place, and I don't know how it did it. My jaw just goes boop. I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is odd feeling. I guess I'm just gonna have to kind of run, because what would happen is that side of my jaw would just slightly be agape, like there would be a gap between my teeth, where normally there wouldn't be, and so it was just very awkward. That's what it made me think of when you said something's attacking you.
Yeah, the distract. See, we learn to deal with distraction all the time. That's we hone skills we don't even know we have. So,
well, shall we knock this news out?
Yeah, we got a few things to talk about today. Actually, there's not even that much worthy of talking on this show. I mean, after all the cool conversation we've had. But anyway, I don't want to take away from anything. I guess first up, this is kind of cool. There's a video released just today from iRacing, and it's showing 2 things that everybody knew was coming. This is not a surprise, but it's another teaser, the BMW M8 GTE, which we could have a whole conversation about how this is going to shake up our endurance team effort, because it's a new flavor. It's hard for people to lay off a new flavor. Ooh, it even has a little camera, little reverse camera. But as I blob away.
Blabo.
We are also seeing the AI in action. So the AI, I believe, is not in this release, right? We confirmed that.
That's correct. Big teases.
We're probably looking at 12 to 13 weeks for AI, but that's 3 months' time. But we are seeing the AI in action. So I'm sure they've done that in the past and we just didn't know it. And now they're actually saying, hey, check it out. It's AI footage. But something I'm excited about AI for iRacing. Billy, after you're gonna be like, only if they let me adjust it myself.
Right. Well, after that's the downfall of Content Manager really for AC, is it gives you all these options, and then when you go to something else, you're like, oh, I'm so limited. This sucks. But I think it'll be cool. I hope I don't think it's any secret. I'm not a big fan of the way the GT and GTE cars drive in iRacing. I just don't care for the feeling those cars provide. Part of me wants to try it because it's the first front engine car in GTE that they've done. So part of me wants to buy it, but then the other part of me says, you haven't enjoyed any other of those cars that you've bought, so maybe you should just save your money.
Well, and like, I think if our team goes to it, that's like, all in all, that's a $200 expense. Individually, it's $15 a guy, essentially. But, I mean, it's like, wow, if we switch cars, the whole team's got to buy it. So
right.
That's certainly a drawback. I like the Ferrari. I don't know. We'll see. Brandon?
I think time will tell. I think right now the flavor of the minute is the Porsche, just because it's got ABS, and it's even gotten a weight penalty for this race. But, yeah, we'll see, and if we do get it, then we can call it the mate instead of the M8.
The mate, yes.
George, what are you guys running? George, you're running the big boys this weekend, aren't you? I think he's running.
Prototype.
Yeah, I think he's in the prototype. So good luck to you guys as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so that's really it out of iRacing. I keep playing. Oh, now I'm watching drag racing videos here. Sorry, I got a little distracted.
It's a little on-air entertainment.
And we're going to get so much for monetization as I play someone else's video here. Oh, and that's a real publication, Wheels. Whoops.
Bye.
Oh, that's a Nova. Okay, moving on.
He's still watching it, so.
Moving on. All right. What else?
Well, I think Dirt, they haven't updated their game yet, but sorry, that was a little dig. I apologize. So Dirt Rally 2.0 on their Twitter, they now have the official Dirt Rally 2.0 podcast. It says we've got a series of very special in-depth interviews to share with you. Episode 1 is out now, so you can listen to it on Spotify or iTunes. So if you're into podcasts and you're really into dirt, you can go check that out. I'm going to check it out just to see if they have anything of value to say. Well, I like podcasts anyway, so.
And if it's episode 1, I'm kind of hoping out in episode 1 they'll lay out kind of like the format, so I'll know whether it's going to be worth tuning in for the future. You know, like what can I expect from them?
Yeah, like give me at least something.
Yeah, but who knows? Maybe I don't know. That could be interesting. I mean, again, with every time I hear anything now, it's like I'm always looking for how that is affected by eSport. Like, is that where they're going to bring in the eSport interviews or, you know, I don't know. Who knows? Everything's going to be different, you guys. 12 more months of this. It's going to be crazy. This is an interesting thing. So, MudRunner. A lot of people like MudRunner. Spin tires. Does anyone call it spin tires anymore? Or is it just MudRunner now?
Nah, I think
MudRunner.
it's...
That is the
I'm
same
not sure.
People, though, right? Same?
Yes.
Sames?
Well, it's the same. MudRunner was the update. So, spin tires was like a title that had been going on for several years, if I remember right. And MudRunner came in and did like a revamp to spin tires.
There you go.
So it became MudRunner spin tires, but it's kind of like if we want to talk 2.0, this would be the 2.0 of spin tires.
Gotcha. All right. Well, and I played it. It was fun. This is one of those ones where I wish I had a lot more time because I would do this if it was just like a matter of dabbling in 8 or 9, 10 different things. But they're announcing that they do have new DLC planned for MudRunner. And again, the keyword there, free. In the next couple of months, they're going to unveil some new stuff coming to it. And then there's this survey, which, you know, I see this and I'm like, hey, awesome. Because I'm gullible. So I'd be like, cool, community survey. Oh, I want to help impact the future of MudRunner. I'm in. And I'm going to need 10 minutes. Sure, I'll give them 10 minutes. They're giving me some free DLC coming April 10th through 11th, they said. But as pointed out by my people who read the fine print, Billy and Brandon.
I like that. That's funny.
The purpose is not to get a list of features for MudRunner 2. The development of MudRunner 2 is going great, so we have verification that MudRunner 2 is coming, not just DLC to this one. And all the features have been locked down. So basically, they want to know about you. So this is just a data grab.
They
It
just
sounds
want your
like
information, people. They just want your information.
Which is too bad. It would have been cool if they were doing a survey asking us what we want, but apparently they know what we want. So there you go. Anyway, free DLC coming in mid-April, though. That'll be good. What else? I'll do this one.
I was gonna say, you go ahead and take this.
Okay, so announce. You know, I get posts on my phone, sim racing related news and things comes on my phone from time to time, and I see a post from Fanatec talking about shipments, and I'm like, oh. No, they're not talking DD. They're talking the Club Sport V2 version of the Formula Wheel, the red and black. We never named this one. The yellow and black I called the Bumblebee. Red and black never got a name from me. They posted that picture of it with the F1 livery, trying to maybe steers that direction titling. Anyway, these are being shipped out. And a death. And apparently, I think people are getting them actually today. Some people might actually get them today, but they are shipped and being shipped. And there's one little... I did read the fine print on this one. And this was a little... I want your guys' thoughts. I'm not going to say a word. I want your guys' thoughts on this wording in particular. Development still goes smoothly for the Podium DD. All remaining minor issues can be fixed by a firmware that we can ship in April as planned. Anything to be heard or read or thought about on that? I didn't necessarily like that reading, what I read in terms of just certain wording. Maybe it was lost in translation. Let's go with that. Maybe it was just me misinterpreting it, but I guess in the world of DD wheels, it is kind of separate. You have hardware and you have software. But they're coming in April, and we know they're going to need a firmware I mean, that's basically what they're saying here. It's going to need a firmware update to fix the minor issues that are still plaguing the base, I guess. Is that how's that?
I will just ask one question.
Mm-hmm.
Are you surprised?
No, not at all. No. I'm not surprised by the delays. I'm not surprised by the need of
When you know
firmware.
when it's 3 no's, he definitely is serious about it. And yes, I saw the question. We are taking questions. Brandon's doing a great job of grabbing them. So if you guys have questions, just put them in chat, and we will get to them today. It might be a little long in the tooth today, but we will get to them. And then Lionheart, remember Danny Sullivan's Indie Heat? Yes, I actually have that game. I played it a few years ago on my old channel that I had. I did a Let's Play of it.
Wait, Danny Sullivan, the IndyCar driver, is in Heat?
It's called Danny Sullivan's Indie Heat. It was an arcade. It was an arcade racer. Like think of Ivan Ironman Stewart Super Off Road or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So something similar to that, kind of that top down, almost isometric view. It's actually pretty fun, and it's on the NES. I played it on the NES. It actually works pretty good.
I have a picture of. I played the Ivan Stewart game like when I was in Florida.
Love that game.
I thought I had a picture.
It's fun.
I was at some beercade
hitting hitting the boost button.
Get the nitros.
Yeah.
And then you launch too far and it just starts smashing off of the walls. Yeah.
Oh, and it's
if I was ever going to put a cabinet in my house, it would be that game.
I almost got one. I almost had one. They wanted just a little too much for it. It was some guy local. He was getting rid of it, and it was just a little too expensive for my taste. But it was in really nice condition. I thought about it.
You know, in regards to Fanatec, you know, the wheel shipping out, that's one thing. I actually had a DD2 on pre-order, and just with kind of a few of the things that have come out, I was pretty disappointed with the delay, but I was still willing to wait. And then with the revelation of their wheels, and having what they cited for being security features so that they could ensure that people's products would stay safe, and that using it with some other base wouldn't fry their wheel and having warranty issues. I don't know. I decided to cancel my DD2, and I'm going to go another route. So,
oh snap!
Yep.
Boom!
Boom! I was going to say boom.
Yeah. So, and we're close. Everybody's still, you know, wondering about the shipping date. The shipping date was April 30th, is what they cited. They may get them out early. You never know. But April 30th. So basically, figure May. That is May 1st. So it was a 5-6 month delay on top of that. So I was like, I'm just gonna do something else for now and see how technology comes along.
Cranky Pants says beercade. Isn't that what our sim rigs are on weekends?
Right.
Oh, too funny.
All right.
What's next, Billy?
Last little bit of news here. rFactor 2 Studio 397 decided to release their roadmap update for February 2019. In here, they talk about graphical updates now that they're working on for the cockpit, since they've got their PBR-based system in place for car bodies. So they're working on that. And now they're also talking, then they go on to talk about their competitions, integrating the competition system into the UI, and also working in the back end of that. That sounds like that's a weird sentence to say. And then it says, we are adding pluggable standings, which will allow competitions to choose from a great variety of ways of scoring results. Again, an awkwardly worded sentence.
Yes.
At the same time as we are running more competitions internally, which is great, by the way. I endorse this a lot. Companies internally running competitions for their consumer. We are learning a lot and adding features to improve the stability and robustness of the whole system. And then they go on to talk about March 23rd is their first real endurance event, the 12 Hours of Sebring, and will feature people such as YouTuber Jimmy Broadbent, Team Redline Fernando Alonso Racing, McLaren Shadow, and Williams eSports. Let's see. And these teams will also be racing alongside our qualifiers, so that'll be cool. and there will be a fantastic range of prizes totaling over 5,000 euros.
Very cool.
So that's cool.
Yeah. Well, and
go
ahead. Sorry. No. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to wrap it up, they talk about they're still working on the Nürburgring and the Nordschleife. So they give some pictures of the wireframe progress, which is cool. I always like these pictures.
I want to blow.
Awesome.
I want to blow this picture up.
I know, isn't that cool? The one, there's several of them.
I mean, I want a giant scale picture. Forget this banner. I want that.
I love the third one down. I love the third one down.
Yeah, the down and right.
Yep. I forget what that corner is called because my memory doesn't. I don't retain corner names very well. But I love this. I love that shot. I just like these. Again, it's the nerdy side of me. I like what's underneath the skin, showing this wireframe, like because I'm always interested in how the cookie's made,
right?
Not just, or maybe it's the cake. Cake's probably a better analogy, but it's very interesting to see how they put these things together. I like it.
I think, and when you talk about those games of like 14 years ago, this is not how tracks were built. So it's just it's cool now because virtually every sim at this point is now to the point where tracks are laser scanned for the most part. For the most part, not entirely, but the good ones are, that's for sure. They also have some shots of what Imola didn't.
Well, Imola, they've confirmed Imola. And now Virginia is also coming in the Ritza pack.
Yeah. So Virginia, that's cool.
Shots of Virginia. Yeah, that'll be great for, again, people. I think that's been the sore spot with rFactor 2 is not a lot of official content from them. And so they are putting it out. They've enlisted the folks over at Ritza to kind of port and help them with some of their stuff. So those of you that don't have Automobilista will be able to enjoy some cars and tracks from that title in what would be a much nicer looking graphical engine.
And VR.
Yes, VR.
Sorry,
so
thing.
no, and I totally understand. I mean, I love Automobilista. So I'm hopeful that they feel the same. These cars feel the same as they do in Automobilista, because if they do, people will get to see why I enjoy Automobilista so much, because I think the physics and the tire model are just second to none, in my opinion. So yeah, that's.
I love their roadmaps. I think that's really cool. They just
it's
go
nice.
out of their way to let the community know what to expect from them in the near future.
Yeah.
They're very upfront about it. They're fairly transparent about it as well. They also mentioned the Tatis and the Formula E Gen 2 are almost ready to release as well. They mentioned at the very, very bottom. Anyway, good stuff. We talked about the competition. If you join, like this goes all the way back to the McLaren Shadow, if I'm not mistaken, but you went through the Steam entry point to enter the competition. So if you were to go there, if you created an account way back then or any time since, if you went there right now, you'd see the 3 different competitions. I've talked about them on various different pit stops. We talked about them in the qualifying that went on for their really, in a weird way, this is kind of like their first big sanctioned event, like in-house, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's not an invite-only experience, because they've done some of those, but this is the first, I think, made available to the public. The only thing that I would like to see is that they open it up a little broader so that a larger pool of people could participate, maybe have the top guys in one room and then have, 2, 3, 4 other rooms for people that aren't as experienced.
Right.
And I don't mind that it's based off of qualifying time. I don't care. I mean, I would prefer a system that utilizes like your best 4 or 10 laps put together, and that's what qualifies you. But, you want to do single lap, that's fine too. It doesn't necessarily. The more I see the iRacing thing for the iRating, the more like back and forth I am on, like, does it serve a purpose? On one hand it does, on the other hand it doesn't, so I don't know. I think using that as a gold standard, while it's admirable, I think it can be improved upon. But again, I think Richie Herndon said it in either your interview or where he was being interviewed by somebody else, is using a qualifying time is still not a bad way, still not a bad way to go.
Right. Yeah, it serves its purpose, that's for sure. So what we're also looking at here is the official GT3 qualifier for the 12 Hours of Sebring. We talked about how this is going to be, it was an open, they're going to cut it off, and this is going to be the first big event. So Kevin Rotting with the 158.191 is on top of the leaderboard by quite a good margin, 0.9 of a second over Sean Jacobs and Max Schulten are the top 3 going into that competition. And that just closed up. So, yeah, cool stuff coming out of rFactor. It's really good to see. It's not just the content, but it's maybe giving
everything.
us something to do as well,
I like those. I like that idea for the people that are into it. Like I said, I would like to see it broadened a little more. But, it wasn't restrictive, but it was definitely not. It's a very narrow scope of people, but it's a stepping stone.
Sure.
So,
well, and as we see this eSport explosion, it's great that we're going to see a balance of invitational or draft type situations where it's very restrictive, and then also have a fair amount of just open game. In real life racing, it would be the stuff that's even available to the privateer. Because in certain series, let's face it, unless unless you got their license, you're not in. You can't just show up and run a car. But it's good that we're seeing both growing at the pretty similar rates. I think they're growing fairly equally, where, the open side. So, other than that, the only other news is what some of us are doing tomorrow. Billy's not running with us. We could make that a whole conversation for the day. But tomorrow is the 12 Hours of Sebring. It'll start at 5 a.m. my time, and it will be 12 Hours of Sebring. We have 2 teams. We have Simpit Team Black with David Grunel, Thomas Dudek, Mitchie Hoyer, Michael Reutemann, and myself. To give you an idea or perspective, average iRating for that team is 2764. I have an iRating at 2611, so I'm going to enter the car. So our logic is, sure, we could rest on the back of David Grunel, but can everybody else on the team run at that level of room? We talk about iRating. Here we are making a decision. Here we get to choose our iRating for an event. And I think if this is anything you need to, that there is a credibility to their system. We are choosing an iRating that balances our team and represents our team as a whole, rather than maybe try to get at a 4,000. That's probably like third split if we entered at David Grunel. But then that means the drivers that aren't, because again, 2764 average, I don't know if they want to run at that level. Third split, 4,000 iRating people. And at the same time, we would probably be sandbagging to go down to our lowest driver and put it in at that, because we do have as much talent as a David Grunel on our team or a Mitchie Hoyer. And that would just kind of be like, I don't know. I don't want to just beat up on people. We've talked about that on the show. Is it even fun to beat up on competition that you're better than? So that's how we use the iRating. And our Team Red, just to give credit to all the guys who are putting in all the work for the Team Simpit, but Stan Donnet, Dan Klar, Moses Choi, James Dowling, and Brandon Waters will be on that team. And likewise, we're using an average iRating to place the team and using the closest driver to that iRating to enter the team. And that's how we're doing it here for at least this race. Someday maybe we'll, move up or something and use that to, but that's how we'll move up. We'll use this kind of thinking to pick our race. So anyway, that's the end of the news portion, but I think go ahead. Yeah.
To piggyback off of that for just a second, I want to see what you think about this. I would like to see them utilize a system in something like this where everybody that's going to be on your team gets to a room an hour and a half before and runs qualifying. Everybody on your team runs qualifying. And then you get an aggregate point score based on your iRating and your qualification, and you put those together, and that's what forms the room, rather than somebody that's got a super high iRating that's actually not that quick at that particular track, because iRacing mixes so many different genres of motorsport together for road. Mainly it's the road side. Oval, you can make an argument too, road, I think, is a bigger disparity between open wheelers versus tin tops, that kind of thing,
Right.
Versus prototypes. So it's not to downplay their I rating, but I have noticed people that have low I ratings excel in some cars, and people that have high I rating, do not do as well in some of these cars. So what I think would be a little more accurate is to do some sort of, and they would have to rewrite their whole system. So this is not a possibility right now, but maybe in the future when they revisit writing their system, I would like to see a system where they put everybody together, everybody qualifies, and then as an aggregate point score puts you in a room.
That'd be much more accurate for sure. I think that when we're back on the iRacing iRating thing, you know, because it covers all road racing. And like you said, there is a difference. I know guys who are great in open wheel and just terrible. I mean, not even just like not as good, but like just bad at driving GT cars. You know, it's completely different animal. And so you could have your 5,000 I rating from running in Formula One type cars all the time. And if you're the guy in this car, you might not even be close to that same 5,000 level.
And I'm not saying that guys can't transfer over. There are some guys that are just good across the board, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
Get them. Eat them. Eat them. Tear their leg off.
See, that one actually has a little more violent frequency. The other one, I knew he wasn't that alarmed. That's one that if that stays, I'm gonna have to
He's
react.
ready for blood.
So anyway, any more on that, or should we move on? I know we have some really cool topics to talk about.
We've got a few questions, so we can move on to those.
Got some catch up to do. You know, obviously we had some technical difficulties last week. I do want to thank everybody for putting up with our growing pains here and teething. And I personally love doing this show. I know you guys do too. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here and supporting us, and we have a blast doing it. So, excuse me. So I think we could do some catching up from the last week or two, where some stuff got dropped that we didn't get to. But last week, Amir asked, Sim Racing in chat, that Billy kind of alluded to it, was the fact that with F1 eSports and NASCAR Heat and potentially even ACC, depending on how that final product comes out, that with some of the more serious sims and their eSports side of things, are we going to see titles such as rFactor 2 or iRacing start to fall behind when it comes to sim racing, and staying relevant with the push of these basically more arcade-based titles and eSports?
Shaun?
Yes. No.
And next topic.
It depends on how a company wants to define that impact. So when I think of iRacing, because I've thought about this since we talked about it last, iRacing has made it very clear why they built a sim, what they're going for, and who their clientele are. And I don't think that group, as an example, is going to be that affected by what the others do. Like, almost like, to me, you almost could even say it's like a different industry to an extent. And it's like, well, their people are there for a reason, doing certain things on a sim that they consider a certain level. And it just kind of doesn't matter. I mean, like, I'll just use F1 2018 as maybe the most successful esport right now, or at least the most, elevated status at this point, at least until what's going on now. But, and it's like, well, I don't think there's many people who would even take the argument of comparing the two sims, but F1 2018's multi-platform. It's a little more arcade. It's more mainstream. It's got the licensing and content of Formula One. It's the obvious choice for their esport for all those reasons and factors. And none of that is what iRacing was ever going for. So I don't see how they're going to be that impacted unless a large amount of their people started flocking to that sim. But to be honest, on the esport level, how quick it's becoming the pro ranks, you're only talking about the top 100 even having a realistic chance of making that switch if they're going after the money. So that still leaves 99.9% of the rest of us playing the sims that we wanted before all this got going. Where I do think it'll have an impact in the sims that actually make changes to who they are and their philosophies of what they're building to accommodate esport. So when I was talking earlier about Assetto Corsa Competizione, and have they pigeonholed themselves by being a one discipline, one very strict series and rule book and track selection and branding and all the things that we talk about on a daily basis that make sim racing so awesome, and they're like, cool, we'll take this little piece of it. If they did that in the name of esport, will it work on a different level or will it pay off? I don't know. So I can see where there would be impact, and I'm not saying that's what they did. I'm just using that as my example. So yes, I think that we could see an impact if a game started dumbing down in order, but you know, and that gets to a whole other conversation that we've had and we need to continue having on controllers. Because what do we mean by dumbing down? I think it has the potential to have a long-term impact. I am inclined to think that it won't, because I think those who build sims for sims will maintain that philosophy of life, and those who want to go after the numbers or the esport will design things more focused for those areas. You know, I think they'll go after that direction more than change their sim. So anyway, that's my thought. Billy?
What do you think, Billy?
Well, I used to have a much stronger opinion one way, but are we going to see iRacing fall behind when it comes to sim racing? And what do they need to do to stay relevant? I think iRacing's biggest problem is not how expensive they are, is not the kind of barrier to entry that they have. I think their biggest issue is how slow they are to react. In other words, when there is this trend, right? We had eSports coming in. How long did it take them to start stepping up their game with the eSports competition? How long does it take them to put out new update? They are restricted by cars. You know, how many cars they can have in a server. They've got all these little restrictions that cause them to have to work on something for much, much longer than I would say maybe like an F1 or a NASCAR Heat or an ACC. I think those titles can adapt quicker and make movements and patches or new content faster, and still with these same. Part of the argument I hear is, well, iRacing takes so long because they're perfectionists. They're not perfectionists. They do a good job, but they are not perfectionists because the product that released is not perfect. So the difference between them and an rFactor 2, an ACC, would be what? The length that it takes them to produce content. So I think their biggest problem and what they need to do to stay relevant is not necessarily making it cheaper would be more viable for people, obviously. Changing things would make the user experience better, but I think the biggest problem they have is how many times have they gotten a car and then it goes out almost right when they get it, because it takes them so long to do it. And I think that is their biggest problem. And I'm not saying that they don't work hard. I'm not saying that they're wrong in doing that. I'm just saying that if they want to stay toe-to-toe with these other companies that can produce things of a similar quality, they just need to turn it around.
I think the important takeaway for me on this is that using these other sims or games or whatever you want to call them as these tools for esport, that if they can use those and they're accessible by the masses, by the people that aren't used to running at the levels of sim that we are, that it might lower that bar of accessibility. And is it a true sim? No. Is it something that you can have fun on and that might encourage people to get more in depth with it? I absolutely believe that, and I think that's a fantastic thing, honestly, in my opinion.
You know, and John also brings up a good point. These guys, I'm blown away by how much these guys don't know about what their competition is doing, because they're so insular and they think that they're at the top of their game. John makes a comment about iRacing and sim racing system. I've had a conversation with the guys at Kunos when I was at E3, and you talk about certain things and then they're like, what is that? You're like, how do you not know what that is? So they don't even have somebody that can. Anthem, I'm going to go outside the scope of sim racing, but Anthem was just released and it has a ton of problems. It's a video game. It's it's an MMO basically. It's this looter shooter thing. And they are repeating same problems that previous releases from other companies are having. And so in sim racing, it feels the same way. I am blown away by, we talked about this earlier, the non-industry standard that hasn't happened. If I'm just going to use Shaun's example, he was talking earlier, and you can expand on this, is that you made the comment that why aren't more sims or games using iRacing's method of just taking the raw data from your peripheral and that's it?
Yeah.
Then it's in there, it works, and that's done. Why aren't they doing that? It's a great question. And I think part of the problem is they don't bother because they see iRacing as something else. Well, we're not in competition with those guys. But why can't you take the good parts of that and implement it into your sim of choice?
And I'm imagining that's something that's fairly simple too. That's not like a new game engine kind of thing. You know, it's like, okay, it's just telling your thing how to read devices and working with Windows in that respect for that, you know, for the most part.
Yeah, so I think part of the problem is they're I know when we were talking about the rally stuff in iRacing, the question was, well, where do we go for rally? You know, what examples can we use for rally? And, you know, okay, well, so I started listing off, you know, here's titles that you can check out to give you a nice broad scope of the good and the bad, because you need to look at the bad stuff too. I mean, as a track designer for slot cars, I've run on so many different tracks. I always retain things, and I'm like, when I build a track, I'm sitting there going, I know what I don't like, and I didn't like that, so I'm not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Where if I just stayed in my own little bubble, I would be creating tracks for people that parts would suck, and I would never learn from that. And so my thought process is, I'm not saying all of them do it. I think just a good portion of them don't go outside their wheelhouse, experience something else so that they know not only the good, but the bad.
Right. I would think that if you wanted to make the best sim on earth, we always talk in that utopian philosophy of if we had a perfect sim, you know, they'd all be the same. But like, if you wanted to build the perfect sim, in my mind, you would almost have a full-time person who is getting you that information. Like that's a valuable money spent to have a guy who sits in your, you know, and I'll use iRacing as an example here. Cool. So iRacing, one thing you need a guy you're paying $40,000. You're probably spending less than that for this job, who is playing every other sim except iRacing all day long, every day, to look at UI inspiration, looking at point system inspiration, handling model graphic features, you know, what works, and just as importantly, what doesn't work. You know, animated fans, like, is it cool? Yeah. Is it cool if every third dude's the same? Maybe it's not that cool. You know, I'm just, you know, and I'm not making that judgment. I'm just saying, but they could be bringing things that didn't work in just as much as things that worked if you really weren't so full of yourself, right? Because like you said, they all kind of like, oh, we know what we're doing, right?
I think
MudRunner
I'm
2,
thinking that
they know
view
what they're doing.
themselves as not really in competition with other games or sims, when reality, they're all fighting for our same dollar, right? So I don't understand why. I mean, somebody said it. I apologize who missed it, but I think it was RTA said that's, this is standard business. When I was selling stuff for Gray Bar Electrical Company, I had to know what my competition was doing, what they were offering, and here's what competition was. So here's what I can do better. Like, I mean, and you go and meet somebody for the first time. It's no different than somebody sitting down for the first time. They've taken a chance on your sim or game and decided that I'm going to give you guys my dollar. Impress me.
Right.
Basically, that's what you're asking. You're asking the developers to give you an experience that you either haven't had somewhere or that have improved upon it. And when those, this goes into a whole nother topic about default setups and all that, but why don't you want your product to be the best it can on its first step through the door?
Right.
No different than when I walked into a meeting, I had to make a presentation. Here, this is what we can do. And I know it's good. And I know why, because I've studied what other people are doing in this industry.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Yeah. Are you going to buy a car when you walk onto the lot and the bumper's falling off or some of the moldings are popping up?
But it has an amazing paint.
Yeah. Well, we're going to cover that. Yeah, we're going to cover that and get it fixed on a recall. But don't worry about
that. We'll patch that 2 months down the line. That bumper will just go back on.
It's a firmware. No, I'm kidding.
Exactly. That is exactly it.
That firmware is the brakes.
Yeah. So, Shaun, you kind of touched on this, and we really started to get into it last week before we had technical issues. And it was talked about the previous week, and it's the controllers versus the wheel, and the real life. To me, the real life parallel of pedals versus hand controls. And adaptive technologies and stuff. And to me, being able, as long as there's not an advantage for using one type of input over another, and some might even argue that it's a disadvantage because it's a less natural input, say using a controller over a wheel and pedals in a driving sim, does that discount a sim if you can use a controller over a wheel? And to parallel it, if you think about it and go, okay, yeah, it is a discount. What about somebody in real life, say like Alex Zanardi, that doesn't have the use of a traditional input? They adapt and they learn and use their abilities to be able to use something like hand controls or, maybe even a mouth tube or some sort of input to get to that point.
Billy, you go first. Hold on, I heard a knock. Hold on.
Okay. It doesn't. I mean, we should be taking into account people that have lost the use of their legs. Or, I mean, I was watching a guy do dirt rally. He has no use of his legs and his left arm basically doesn't work. And he had to rig the controller to play so that he could get around the tracks. And it was amazing. And that, I think, is the advantage that we have, is that it's not blocked off. We do have the ability to have alternative control methods for people that don't necessarily, have issues with their extremities, that can't play it like we, would like that like I would like to play it. I want to play with the wheel and pedal set. But should there be different classes in a competition? Sure, I don't see why not. I don't see why you can't have a gamepad option and a steering wheel based competitions, because you are going to have differences there. But just because you can use a gamepad or an alternative form of control doesn't mean that the sim is any less sim.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion.
I'm back.
All right. Do you have a opinion on that, Shaun? Of
I
controllers versus wheel?
I actually have a very strong opinion on it. I mean, like, I know John Hill. I saw him type in earlier something about you shouldn't even be able to use a controller on iRacing. And so when I think of an eSport level, like watching the guys up on stage, I don't want to see them using controllers. But on the other thing, I'll just put it this way. In a real car, there's a reason they put a steering wheel. Like, at this point in time, technology and everything, and at one point it was just a stick in the middle. There's a reason it's a steering wheel, and that's because over the years they've decided this is the best and easiest and most accurate way to use this device. And if a little thumb controller was the dexterity that the average person could do that with, that's what would be in a car today, especially today. So I feel like, to an extent, I'd even make the argument that people using a controller technically are at a disadvantage. It is actually, in my opinion, to use a controller in iRacing, which can be done, requires a next level dexterity that I don't have. Like, I just cannot be that gentle on a thumbstick to be accurate for turning in for Apex. But I'm not going to take away somebody's ability to do it, because to an extent, if they can do it with their thumb, I feel like they almost have more skill than I do turning to Apex. Now, that's my thoughts on a full-blown sim, right? Now, on the arcade titles, sure, they might have an advantage going to lock, and you could argue that some arcade titles are even designed to work with a controller first and a wheel secondly.
Right.
But when we're talking full-blown sims where they're not made that way, I mean, I my hat's off to anybody who can actually use a thumbstick to drive iRacing first. Second of all, I think when we push things to extremes, that it's easier to make decisions. But I heard you mention right before I went away that, like, Sam Schmidt using a blow tube and head tracking. Your Sam Schmidts, your Alex Zanardis, the list goes on and on and on of disabled. Forget people who used to race, who now disabled race. The amount of disabled people should have every right to experience racing, because I am an ambassador of racing. I'm an ambassador of sim racing, and I want everyone to be able to do what I love so much. So with that said, I'm willing to accept, even though my purest desires would prefer to know that everybody was doing it equally. No, I guess I really don't feel that way. That's just what I think I would think. But that in reality, no. I want everybody to have a chance. I want Alex Zanardi out there running on hand controls on his steering wheel. It's awesome. I want to see Sam Schmidt in the next pro race running on a blow tube. It's like, wow, he's not all that good compared to the other guys, but the fact that it could even be done is just...
Right, that's the amazing part.
Yeah, and so I'm all for it. I don't think many of us are being beaten by somebody on a hand controller in an iRacing or an rFactor. I don't think you're getting beaten by that guy very often, if at all. In Forza, probably, but...
Well, and there's no reason why it can't be separated. And as a business, on a business end of it, it's smart to make all those things function really well. I mean, if you look at Race Room probably has one of the better comprehensive gamepad setups that you can do, where you have the ability to change the ratios. It has 3 stages, from center to just off center, middle of center, and then at the edge. You can change how that ramps. So stuff like that, it's just smart from a business perspective. It's just a smart idea. Now, we could go into, do we need to separate them or not? That's a whole nother discussion, where you could have an open competition, and then if you really wanted to show off the sim racing aspect, you have to at least have a steering wheel. I mean, we could go down that road. I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with that. But I just think, I have a friend that doesn't have the use of one of his feet. He can't use it real well. And he actually drives with one of the hands he has mapped as a brake. He can use his foot for the clutch because it doesn't really, you're not requiring that much finesse. So he can just kind of stomp on the clutch if he's using a clutch. Right. But the brake he can use with his hand, because that requires finesse, and that's how he drives. And I just think of things like, or people that even have a hard time hearing. Like, I don't understand why It's better now, but for a while there, you couldn't adjust the volumes of different things. iRacing, you still can't adjust the volume. And for people that can't hear well, you're excluding those people from having the ability to compete on the same level. Now, their excuse is, well, it's a cheat. And I'm like, but if everybody's doing it, then it's not.
Right.
So what does it matter?
Sure.
All you're doing is helping the guy that, you know, maybe worked in a factory for 30 years and wants to enjoy your sim in retirement and can't freaking hear very well out of one ear or two or both ears, and he can make an adjustment. So it's those things that I don't know, if it was me and if it was my sim, like, that all would be available. I don't see a reason why it shouldn't be.
Well, and if we're going to, you know, we're kind of narrowing the bounds on what we feel is acceptable. So if we're saying that using a controller is unacceptable, by the flip side of the spectrum, I have to then question, well, is then me buying a load cell brake or a hydraulic brake, is that now considered cheating? Because if we're calling a certain point the low point, well, what is the high point? At what point am I buying an advantage? And I firmly believe...
Well, there's pedals you can make adjustments on the curve of your throttle and everything.
Yeah.
So how is that not any... What's the difference?
Even to an extent with the calibration, you can adjust, because I've been going through this week, and I was fighting it with iRacing where I miscalibrated the pedals just with how much force I put on there, and it drastically changes the sensitivity.
Sure.
You know, I mean, if you screw up the calibration on your pedal, you can make it to where when you barely touch it, your brakes are locking up, or you've either got to stand on the thing to get it to even to slow the car down. You know, so
I'll give you another one. You know, like, it would be cool to have certain things, right? Now I'm going to go the other direction on something we don't think about very much other than, like, maybe Tim, but I would love to be in a league where you had to run an H-pattern shifter, a manual clutch, and in cars that are as strict...
prerequisites.
Yeah, and literally where, like, if you don't have this, you can't even be in here, and it needs to be verifiable some way, whether it be like in iRacing, you have driving aid restrictions. I don't think you can force manual, but you can force clutch, I think. I can't remember now, but, you know, that would be kind of cool. When motion sims were really early on, and I was not quite to the point where I was, like, super comfortable in them, and I'd be like, man, it'd be cool to have a league of guys all in motion sims. But I feel like it's making me a little slower than I was in my static sim, so I wouldn't want to sacrifice time to have this added cool feature. So then again, I was asking for, like, that consistency, because I can't have it if it's going to make me slower unless everybody was taking that same penalty.
Sure.
But, you know, that's just the flip side of the coin. I mean, again, I have to use a Sam Schmidt as just the ultimate. It's like, well, man, that guy certainly had no advantage.
Freaking Corvette. I was at Sonoma a few years ago when they had the Continental GT cars, and they had that Corvette. I don't know if it was his specific one, but they had a Corvette there with him, and there was a booth, and it full blown was showing the tech of the tube and the whole thing. It's amazing. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It really is.
It really reminds me of, if you look at the way technology is, and this kind of brings it back full circle to what we were talking about earlier with the racing series and what you identify with as the pinnacle for you for whatever given discipline it is. But as technology moves along, I know a lot of these new cars have electronic steering, fly-by-wire throttle assemblies. You know, what if we get to a point where they determine, oh, you know what? Why don't we pull the pedals out of this thing? Why don't we pull the steering column out of this thing? And here, Mr. Driver, it's a lot less physical for you to have this gamepad, and you're from this generation where you can sit there in the seat and hold this controller, and you're strapped in, and you can operate this race car with this gamepad. What does that do at that point about the state of racing or our perception?
Right. I think the only problem you'll have at that point is the same argument I had in slot cars, is when people go say, well, we need slotless slot cars, and I'm all, that's an RC car. Right? But I would get this argument from people that would come into my store and say, well, it would be really cool if, you know, these things didn't have slots, but they were on the track. I'm all, that's just an RC car.
Here's your menu.
So I would say the same thing here. There's a reason you have virtual race cars, and so the likelihood of it going that direction where it's not just a passenger car, you get in, push a button, take me here, that you're actually racing the car is probably very small, because why go through that amount of expense when you could spend a fraction of that, make a virtual car, and have that be the thing that you're running?
Yeah. It was it's a hypothetical, right? So it's
Right.
as far as where the technology could take us, and how it gets blurred. I think if you discount a sim for it having gamepad support or any other alternative other than traditional hand controls, it's a disservice, in my opinion. To just write it off and say, well, that makes it an arcade game or a simcade or whatever badge you want to put on it.
Now, here's the thing that I think about, though. I don't even think it's 10 years. I think so here we are, 2019. I think by 2029, and long before then probably is my prediction, you will walk out to your car, you'll get in, and you'll say, Alexa, work. And your car will drive you to work. Like, that's within 10 years in my mind. And if
Dude, I could get extra nap time in that way.
Wouldn't it be awesome? Read a book, watch a movie. But it's like between how far along Google Maps and directions and voice activation,
right,
all of these things coming together at the same time that autonomous vehicles are coming along. They right now could already build you a car that doesn't need a steering wheel or brake or gas. Those features are only there because we humans are still demanding them. The tech is there that they could pull them out tomorrow if they needed to. And I believe in the next 10 years they will. And I think there will be a lot of people hold on. So I don't think it'll be 100% of the market, but I think that a good portion of the market will be there. And then I don't think that means the death of racing, by the way, because I think it actually could, in a weird way, be good for racing, because it could take it back to the days where these are the daredevil heroes of our culture. Guys still willing to take a wheel in the hand and drive it manually,
Well, I was just listening to another deal that Kyle Petty does, and he interviews Mike Helton, and he talks about, he lived in Tennessee by Bristol, but the only way they could get racing news was the newspaper. And then going to their local tracks. So they would hear about these heroic stories, and that was the entertainment. That the entertainment was movie stars and racing car drivers. So to your point, I mean, that's what that was back in the day.
Yep. And we might go full circle on it. And racing's always been such a small part of the overall entertainment spectrum of our society that, it can go through total changes and still maintain that market share, because it's never been football. Well, I take that back. It has been as big as football. But in, my lifetime, racing's always been a very small sport here in America.
Yeah.
Especially.
So, Shaun, you kind of touched on it. Azar asked us a question today, and I think that catches us up for what we were behind on news. So I'm glad we got there.
I love this one, by the way.
Yeah. And you kind of touched on it, actually. And Azar asked is that where do you two see sim racing in 10 years on the hardware and software side? And what improvements do you wish to be accelerated the most in sim racing?
I'm ready.
Shaun?
Go ahead.
I love this. I've thought about this since you wrote the question this morning, and I'm like, you know what? Here's what I want. 10 years from now, and a lot of this could be here again inside of 18 months. VR will go VR, AR. So it'll be a VR. Like sim racing, we need the VR, not the augmented. We need VR. We need our visuals being produced, not halo effect, right? We don't race with imaginary windows. We need real view. So we are VR, not AR. But we need AR incorporated into that so we can see our buttons, use our button boxes, use our keyboard, and use other features. So to me, the first most obvious is VR, AR, and supplying it at a rate that can maintain the same crispness and clarity and resolution and speed of my monitors. We get that, no one will ever use a monitor ever again in sim racing. That's part one. Part two, and I've been thinking about this when we said it earlier, I don't want to be an engineer. And I know that they make the virtual engineer things that exist now, but they're only at their beginning. I want AI engineer. I want to be able to drive my car, and maybe this is where some of the other fun factor experience, where like, I want to be the driver, and I want to have a crew. I want to have a team. And I want there to even be proper interaction, and maybe iRacing won't see this, but maybe this is where a Heat 3, Heat 3, but it's like, I want the live the life experience that, forget the media. I don't need to answer media question and do the politics side. I want the real hardcore version of being a driver in racing. And I can see the games developing back-end AI that allow you to talk to your crew chief before the race in preparation, setting up the car. You talk, they do, you drive.
Sure.
And they talk to you too. It's not just that you talk like it's Alexa. No, it should be smart enough to, and you'll have to learn to work with your crew chief. And then the same thing when it comes to like pit stops. I know a lot of this stuff is already in some of the features, even some of the setup changes. But I'd like to see a really expanded version. And then it makes it so that the better as a driver you are at describing, like you can call it loose, but if you can tell them it's loose coming off the corner, you just narrowed it down to 20% of the loose instead of leaving it just the concept of loose. Now we can focus on this 20% of the car. The better you are at talking to your crew chief, the better they are at fixing your car. And even more importantly, again, if I'm a sim racing driver, I feel really bad for the guys who are in cars that have to make constant adjustments. So I don't know the guys running the peak antifreeze. Are they staying on top of the... I don't think they stay on top of the car nearly at the rate that a real NASCAR team does. So, every time a car comes to pit lane, it is only 1 out of 10 times that car goes back out with the exact same setup it had. Whether it was a half pound here, half pound there, 1/4 turn there, something's happening every time they come to pit lane. And I don't know if we do that as sim racers. I know we don't, actually. In roadie stuff, for the most part, you're not. But I'd like to see more of that. We're seeing weather changes and things that you have to adapt to during a race, right? So if that's the next gen or phase of sim racing is real-time weather, well, then we're going to need to make real-time changes to stay with it. I'm not an engineer. I don't have a wrench, but I need it done. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but like in the world of flight sim, if you get really into like running commercial airline type stuff in flight sim, like, oh, I'm just going to run a 747 for UPS, for example, there are people who actually enjoy being the air traffic controller side of that game as much as the guys who want to be flying the planes. And so if you join a league in that environment, you will actually get a scheduled flight. They'll send you an email saying your flight's at 6 a.m. flying from point A to point B. When you get there and you fire up your sim and you log in, there's ATS guys ready to sit there and take you through the whole taxi out and put you into the air and hand you off to another ATS guy. Wouldn't it be cool if sim racing kind of got like that too? Maybe someday we have guys who actually want to be like virtual crew chiefs, and not in the static way that it is now, but like where you actually are entering an entire team, shoot, as VR goes along, who's to say we wouldn't have guys coming over the wall virtually, and burp, 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 I mean, I don't know. I think that we'll
get inside the car. How you doing today?
Totally. You need a drink of water? I think it'd be kind of cool, though. I could see a lot of expansion on the interaction parts. Multiplayer is going to go through changes. MMO has changed gaming, right? The concept of map. Who's to say it wouldn't have an impact on racing one day too? So who knows? I think there's a lot of things that we could see. And then the obvious just being that they'll expand on physics. They'll expand on graphics. Track accuracy, I think we have pretty good, but it'll be the graphical side. It'll be the live track side. How does a track really grow and evolve through usage, which we're just starting to see across sims. How does weather affect a track? Anybody who races the same track all the time knows damn well how much the exact same track changes from day to day, whether it be temperature, dust, usage. There are so many factors that affect the grip and relationship between your tire and that ground, that they are living, breathing entities. And we're just seeing the beginning of all of that kind of stuff too. So anyway, that's kind of my future of sim racing. I don't think we're going to see huge changes though, because the root of it is very simple. It's we're driving cars on track, and
Right.
how accurately can we depict that? So,
How about you, Billy?
I would agree with everything Shaun says. That would be really cool. I think we need to get to the point, and hopefully, I think it circles back to the point we made earlier about making sure hoping that these developers are checking out other things, because if they do, then that will speed up the progress of the Sims moving forward. And what I would like to see is just improvements on quality of life things, whether it comes from the user interfaces to point systems or something, of ranking of drivers. These are all things that I'm just adding on to what Shaun said. The advancements in understanding tire models and physics for the cars, because like I said, if we were so good at all this stuff, then everybody's stuff would be the same.
mm-hmm.
So we're not there yet. We haven't. There's always these intangibles, and it's a person or a group of people's interpretation when building the engine for all these pieces. It's their interpretation of how it should be.
Yeah.
So I think if we could push more to a little more of the track feel, I think like I said, if the best argument is Shaun's Sim Pizza, right? Taking all these different pieces, I think that's where we'll end up going, is everybody kind of pushing towards this. They're pushing towards the same point, but everybody's going about it in a different way. And I think we'll end up pushing to the same point where I think maybe, just maybe, what ACC is doing or what Dirt Rally is doing, where it's more a concentrated experience, may become more the norm, because if everybody's doing the same thing and they got all the same stuff, then what's the difference?
Right.
The difference will be in the presentation, what they're offering versus the actual tire and physics model. It's like me when I was at Gray Bar trying to sell somebody, THHN 12-stranded wire. It is what it is. I can't make it any different. So what am I going to do? Right? The product is the product. So what comes along with that is service and all the amenities that I can try and make a better buyer experience. This would be no different. If we get to that point where everybody kind of comes together and says, okay, we are at the point where we're going to make very tiny, small incremental changes now because we've got everything so good, it may splinter off in directions that we don't foresee.
Yeah. Norman mentioned I made it sound like it was a Ready Player One version of sim racing. And it's funny you say that, Norman, because I cannot tell you that movie has had a huge influence on my thoughts of the future across the board in gaming, maybe in culture entirely. Getting back to virtual teams, at first I thought I just mentioned the over the wall, and it's like, well, that's pretty simple, right? But what if our endurance car took on damage and the game included, like I've played Wrench in VR, where you literally, looking at a brake caliper is multiple parts. It's not just a brake. You have your disc, you have your holder, you have the caliper, or the hydraulic part itself, brake pad, the backer behind the brake pad, you've got the tube, the lining, the pressure within the system, all these things just to make one brake part. You've got 4 bolts holding that whole assembly on the upright, and it comes off in 2 pieces. And it's like, well, what if a repair in iRacing meant, so you take on some damage, and you've got the meatball, you come down pit lane, and, your car goes into the garage because you've elected to go in the garage, not just service the car. And all of a sudden, you've got 4 guys who are having to, work together because it's one car, but they are literally taking the parts off the car, getting replacement parts by whatever means necessary, and then putting that exact car back together again with undamaged pieces. That's not an impossible idea because all of those things exist right now. We're not even waiting 10 years. It's just a matter of computer horsepower and somebody building something with that much depth, where we're now combining, 2 games admittedly into one.
Yeah.
Bill, I was just talking about the game Wrench that I play in 3D in VR. You know, and I have to go to the car, and when I go to, you know, I take the tire off with 4 lug nuts. Now I have the disc available to me, you know, the braking system. Well, I can take 2 bolts and take the outer part of the caliper off. Now I have the brake pad, you know, the holder's still on the car with the brake pads. I have the caliper part in my hand. Brake pads, the backing plate, all of that still on the car. It comes off with another 2 bolts and so on. Well, what if when we get the meatball in iRacing, in an endurance race in particular, your virtual team literally did go to work, and they're having to take the car apart and put it back together again. I mean, I don't know. I could see, you know, getting back to Ready Player One and people who don't have any interest in racing, maybe, but man, I'd be a mechanic on one of those teams. That would be freaking awesome. You just sit there, you watch the race, you manage time, you wait for the bell to go off telling you you're on, you throw on your VR helmet, and you and 3 other dudes are working together, putting the car back together. 20 minutes later, it's back out on track. You guys are high-fiving, right? I mean, I don't know. It sounds pretty crazy, pretty awesome to me.
You know, that would be awesome. And I think since we have all those technologies and we're starting to look at things like DCS was one of my distractions when I was having a little burnout, and they support haptic feedback devices for the gloves. So you can actually wear gloves, you know, with your VR, and you can reach up and touch things on your instrument panel and your dash and flip switches and stuff. Right? Very cool.
Good time.
So, you know, if they could put those layers in there, but I think the thing we're fighting right now is optimization. And for me, this is what I would love to see the focus on for the next little while is optimization, because there's great titles out there. Project Cars 2. It's a great title. It's fun to drive. The VR experience can be really good. And for those that don't know, I'm an exclusive VR guy. And I'm starting to feel like a vegan with the VR thing. It's like, just, just can't not say it.
You're missing out on all that good.
I know.
That doesn't sound right.
Awesome. But yeah, so you can have such a great experience, and then you can do another race and another discipline, and the optimization lets you down. You have frame rate issues. It pulls you out of the immersion that you have. Where, from my experience, like iRacing, their optimization is really good. And it could just be that they're on an older, platform or whatever the reason, but it's having that stabilized and having the optimization of the software side of things to even just be able to use what we have now versus pushing the cutting edge of our hardware side of things, I think will really make a difference. If you're not having to build a $2,000 system to run these technologies properly, I think will really kind of help push it to the next level.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it, because right now we have a lot of things that we've maybe brought into the Sims but haven't been optimized. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of the gray area problem areas right now. So we were talking about living tracks. It's like, yeah, a lot of the Sims are trying to dabble in that right now. But there's going to be a learning curve that was extensive as tire model, which they still haven't solved definitively. So how long is it going to take them to get that? And I don't, it's one of those things that I think it sounds okay at one level when you start, and then you realize how layered it really is, and it's like, oh, well, come on, how many factors are there? You got temperature, you got dirt factor, build up. It's like, well, no, but all those interact together too. So now for all those, what sounded like a simple thing, it's actually multiplied by 3 because of the other factors that could affect just that. And so, yeah, I think that the optimizations, VR's awesome, but it's the lack of the optimization that's keeping it to where we do still feel like vegans, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to explain to the world that this is a healthier diet, and they're like, whatever, cheeseburgers are awesome. And right now it's kind of hard to make the argument because our vegan diet tastes like shit, and we want to tell them this is the future, but no one's listening. They're just gnawing on their bacon.
Yeah. Same here, same here. But I guess for me, it falls back on if you believe in something, support it. And if you can see the fact that this is going to be the way of the future, do what you can to support it. And we're a pretty small segment here, but if we can carry this into the future, I think that'll speak volumes to what we do as a hobby and our passion behind it. So.
That's fair. I agree with that too, by the way. I at the track had to buy some earbuds, and I probably could have ordered something online. Like, I realized I didn't have them, and I was like, I'm just going to buy them at the track. And I knew as soon as I made that choice, I was going to be paying like 20, 30, 40 bucks extra to get it done. But my logic was, I need that guy at the track, because someday I'll need something in a real emergency, and he'll be the only way I can get it. And if everything I get is online, I do the same thing with Best Buy. I shop at Best Buy and often even pay a couple bucks extra because I need that shop, because on a Sunday when nobody else is open, they will be. And they'll be in my zip code, and I will be able to get an HDMI cable in an emergency. Mm-hmm. So there are times, and I think the same thing on a technology. It's like, well, if you want VR to be here, well, if you don't support it, it might get swept under the rug. I think VR is pretty safe, but we've seen it with mini tech, mini devices, mini gadgets that we love, but just didn't get an audience and disappeared entirely. Yeah. And with it, the support that goes with it too. So you'll never see another patch.
Billy, anything else to add to that?
No.
Okay.
I think we're good.
We're over 2 hours here, but I did ask the group in chat, and they would like us to keep going here. And I've got one more question that Mike from SimRacing 604 brought up today. And it is that Assetto Corsa Competizione early access is 2 weeks behind schedule. And it looks like the Blancpain series is starting up April 13th. And if they can't align the game with the start of the season, is that a bad thing, in your opinion?
I think they'll miss the hype. I think it's a marketing opportunity that they'll miss. I don't know how much it damages their sales numbers, because I think people that are already excited about it have already bought into it. But as far as exposing other people to a title that they may not be aware of, that maybe follow the Blancpain series, you probably miss out on some marketing hype. And that's kind of what my fear always is with this early access stuff, is you ride this wave of excitement, and then you no longer have it when you have the official release, where you've done all these improvements and tweaks to the game that give you this experience that you're actually looking for. You lose that excitement, that hype build from when the game actually drops, and they can try to pump it up as much as they want, but it becomes white noise at a certain point. How many times are you going to see ACC this, ACC that, ACC this, and then when it releases, it kind of falls flat because you've already spent all your, we talk about the currency thing, you've already spent all your currency and excitement in the early development stages where you were still trying to get that title rolling, versus, all right, we've heard the community, we've settled on this experience, boom, here's our definitive edition. I think you do lose a little bit of the marketing push there, and especially because, like Mike points out, it coincides with the Blancpain series. You might miss some people that you might have gotten otherwise. I don't know.
I don't know how the calendar of the real Blancpain series looks versus the tracks that are actually available for the game. So I don't know, and I don't know. So I don't know if when weekend 1 comes April 13th, is that a track that's already in the title ready to go? Because if it doesn't, it kind of doesn't matter anyway, because there's a chance that they might not have every single track. I haven't cross-referenced, but I think they're missing a couple if I'm not mistaken. Beyond that, I look at F1 2018, which never comes out with the beginning of the season. Like F1 2019 won't be here for 6-7 months, right?
Right.
So they've made that the normal. The other is the eSport might not coincide because they seem to condense these eSport. They're not going to, a racing series likes to use up a good portion of the racing season of the calendar. So depending on how many events they use, usually most big series, they take the total racing season and then just kind of spread their events out somewhat equally through that period of time. And if they're a 40 event season, then they're weekly. And if they're a 12 event season, then they're maybe monthly, or a little more frequently. So I think that with the eSport, we see these condensed versions. Like, look at even the F1 2000. The whole season from start to finish was wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. It didn't have anything to do with the F1 season in terms of the actual calendar dates. So I don't think it'll be a huge impact, but I think, like Billy said, it'll be a giant missed opportunity. Instead of doing this rather thin marketing of one car, one track per release every, so often, I tend to try to, in my mentality of marketing, it's like, well, I would have probably narrowed it down to fewer moments, but try to make more of each moment. Including
impact.
Yeah, including with, and it would have been somewhat critical to get a release out on April 13th. And, getting to their trickle, that's another thing. If they had changed that, the trickle kind of put them in a weird calendar that was going to be hard to make adjustments to.
Right.
So all they could really do with the way they scheduled it, they could only run late. Like, they weren't going to run early and release stuff early.
Right. There was no possibility of it being a surprise or anything. And that ambiguous release date is still kind of out there. I mean, they kind of said that they were trying to get it out, after the last release within a month or two, but they never really officially stated anything. Then
Right.
They kind of reverted and went back to, well, it's going to come out in 2019. So how long did you lose, all that hype, goodwill, all that into your final release? And like we're seeing now, they've got some major problems that they're having to rework because it's not working out how they wanted it to, which is unfortunate. But you run the risk of this doing an early access thing. And I, as much as we want to point back to the original AC, it was not the same animal.
Right. No,
that
not
game was open from the beginning. You could mod it. You could do things to it to not only with their monthly updates that would help the title continue to grow, because modding was and still is a big part of what that title is about.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think they're two separate entities, even though they both were in early access. I think that this one in particular loses a lot of the momentum that they might have gained if they would have just not done early access and just boom, here you go.
Sure.
And now we'll make some adjustments as we go along.
Well, like even their final release, their original date for final release was Q1. That's a 3-month window of time. And it's like, if they, instead of done this regimented calendar rollout, they had been like, okay, let's just knock it down to 3. We're going to have Assetto Corsa Lite. You can get early access to Assetto Corsa Lite, $25. And, a quarter later, we're going to release Assetto Corsa Medium. You can pick it up for $35 for early access of what will become Assetto Corsa Competizione for the normal retail price of games, and then used again a vague date. Well, they could have used all of that instead of just being kind of like, oh, we're late. They could have come out with one more thing to coincide with the April 13th date, made it a big deal still. And so even if the full version wasn't going to come out, they would have just kind of left the room to still be impressive at that important marketing moment in time. So yeah, I think it's just a disservice, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a huge impact. I'm more concerned about, like Billy said, the people who maybe tasted it. It's like selling the title is one part of the goal, but getting people to keep playing it might be just as important to the total amount of money you make. Because if everybody buys it and
Right.
stops playing it, it's going to prevent future sales. If everyone buys it and keeps playing it, then your future sales go through the roof. So I don't
keeping
want
those people engaged and hooked on what you've got.
Yeah. I don't want anyone out there with a bad taste in their mouth for my sim.
Right.
To that also, so I'll agree with you guys that it's a missed marketing opportunity, and maybe not so much here in the States, but especially in other geographical regions where the Blancpain series is a bigger thing, Europe, stuff like that, where it's probably followed, but here it's really kind of not a thing as much, unless somebody's really into that sort of thing and they follow it on their own and seek out that information. I mean, we really don't even get that great of Formula One coverage here. So, to me, the biggest thing is that I think it's less important for them to hit a particular date to capitalize on the real life series marketing as it would be to put out and publish a good experience, a good game, a good race title, because for the people that aren't typically exposed to it, and that's how they see their their ability to get into the series and participate, if it's crap physics or it's got no force feedback like we've seen pretty recently, or it's just broken when they push it out. I don't care if it came out in April, if it comes out in July, it needs to be good.
Right.
Mike is clarifying. Are they missing an opportunity to coincide with online races like iRacing does?
No.
See, and I think that's a dangerous path, because if you don't have everyone, it just points that out and makes it so blatantly obvious and painful that you don't have something that belongs on the schedule.
Unless the sim is incredibly accurate with every new team, and the tracks. They've got all the tracks in there. I know they said they're supposed to, but it makes it a dangerous territory for them on a marketing aspect to try to mirror that series. It would be better if they were more loosely trying to mirror the series, so maybe a few weeks ahead of time. But worrying about that, I don't think is as big of an issue as the actual when the season starts, because all the marketing hype for Blancpain is in full effect. They could say and pick up Assetto Corsa Competizione right now to experience the Blancpain series in your home, and race as one of your favorite teams at all the real racetracks, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know how. I think for a very small subset of people, it might be important. I would like to do ACC on the actual date or close to it, the week coming to. But I don't know how many people actually care. I think if they're in that window, since they don't race every weekend too, I think if they're in their window, it's not that big of a deal.
Right. Like maybe in NASCAR, it is a little more of a big deal where they do run every single weekend for 8 months straight or however long the season is. Maybe there. And then also you look at iRacing where they do have a pretty darn good 1-to-1. I think they have all of the NASCAR tracks, right? There's not a single race NASCAR goes. So
I believe that's right.
And they have the right cars, the right tracks, and they can maintain that weekly schedule, which is kind of brutal too. When you think about other sims, one other thing, again, we talk about iRacing. Well, iRacing has all the systems in place to be able to handle doing that many tracks, that many, you know what I mean? It's like their whole competition and their server setup, it's like they're ready to go. But I think for a lot of others that it kind of exposes the fact that they're not. And, the Blancpain, depending on what's going on in the multiplayer world, it's like, well, now you're telling me that Assetto Corsa is going to have to depend on its AI. It's going to have to depend on its single-player structure, because I'm not sure there's going to be a weekly series available to the masses to be able to participate in that game in that same direct way. Versus iRacing, you can run the exact schedule against human beings, and that changes it quite a bit to me, because I want to race, not just drive for the most part.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess the only other thing, and Mike, hopefully we answered your question there.
Or
But I
added
think
to it.
yeah, or added to it, made things more confusing. One last question I think I had from Theodore, goes by Tofi in our Discord. But basically, and if I'm reading his question correctly, is that do you guys think that we will get to a point where AI will translate the data from the car into the simulator to possibly generate the physics of the car? And that if there's a possibility that people might say, well, it's not a simulator or whatever because of the feel that the AI interpretation of the data gives the cars. I guess I would probably equate this to the version, basically like a laser scan of the track, if you could get it to that technology point to where you've got an algorithm that can take the raw data from the cars and generate it into the physics for the sim.
They already do that.
No. Okay, so is that different? So an AI car is running the physics, granted, but it's that like first step attached to it. So if you took I guess this is the question. If I have an autonomous car and it uses all of its tech to drive, is that different than if I had a robot that can drive a car? So the robot isn't physically attached electronically into the car. He's going to physically drive the car. And is that going to be the same judgment as the AI built into the car using actual sensors?
But it should be simulated with a driver in it.
Right, no, but I'm imagining the robot not being part of the car in terms of electronically speaking, so it's using its eyes and its motors to move a physical steering wheel. Would that be a different driver than the AI built into the computer in the car that actually controls the engine and the brakes if we have a fly-by-wire car?
I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it made very much sense.
The way I interpreted the question was, will AI be able to give us better data for physics? That's how I am interpreting the question. Will AI, if you could put, instead of a human being developing physics in a tire model, would AI, if you could program AI and then put AI into that situation, would they give us a better rendition? And my saying would be no, because somebody still has to create the AI. Some human still has to set parameters for the AI to learn. And moreover, they already do that. Most of the physics engines and tire models now, with a lot of the sims, they have an algorithm. They already have an engine built for that. So all they theoretically have to do is take that data, plug it into their engine, and boom, it spits out the correct, quote unquote, physics for the car and tire for the car and whatnot. The problem I have is what I've always said is it's so dependent on the person that made the engine. It is a human's interpretation of how the data is supposed to be interpreted. So you're still going to have issues. You're never going to have a way. And if you had AI that somehow could get every intangible thing correct, I don't know that us as human beings would like the way that feels. And the reason is we do not have the same things happening virtually that we do in the real world. We're missing certain sensations. And my critique has always been, and I think Shaun said the same thing, is if you go into this process of looking at only the raw data, that should be a guide. That should tell you where to go, what lap times it should be creating, the differences between cars. But there is still a part that we are missing, and we have to take that into account, because I can tell you from firsthand experience, when I got into cars that I was helping develop, and I sit there and go, there is no way that car drives like that. There's not. And it's like, well, that's what the data tells us. And I'm telling you right now, there's no way. I said, watch in car, watch all this footage. There's plenty of camera footage and data with these guys and with their throttle, you know, how they're using the throttle and the input that they're putting into the cars. There's no way you're missing certain things that do not allow you to do what that person is doing in the car. So you need to figure that out. You're going to have to make a concession somewhere.
Right.
And I think, we talk about, I still do a little bit, but for a while there, I thought the NASCAR stuff was not that great in iRacing. I feel like it's way better now, but they don't have certain things. We were talking with Andrew about how the air doesn't pack up against the wall in iRacing. So you have the ability to run next to the fence. Really hard. You watch Kyle Larson, you watch some of these guys run next to the fence. Man, they are charging the corners. It's really, really, really hard to do that in iRacing. And coming from my experience, it's not that difficult. You have to understand how to do it correctly. But once you have it, you should be able to nail it every lap. And so there's certain things that don't happen that I still think should be taken into consideration.
Right. Dan mentioned this is like driver tars in Forza. I'm trying to remember now. So the driver tar, I can't remember exactly how it works. I know that if someone is my friend, they see me on the track, it's Shaun's driver tar. And now, is it using like a ranking system like my Forza points to determine a speed, or is it driving my erratic driving behavior?
So what it does is it sits there and gives you a score for every car and track, and it takes data. So it says, when you're playing, if you've ever played Forza, it'll tell you like great corner, good corner, whatever, and it gives you bonus points for that, or it used to. That all gets put into your driver profile. And then what it says is, okay, if Billy is hitting 80% of these corners correctly and the other 20% of the corners he's missing it, then it spits that out into your race and says, okay, 20% of the time Billy should be missing corners. Billy's breaking so that's how it determines how you drive a track.
So it basically tells the AI to force mistakes.
In theory.
In theory, yes. It doesn't do it great, but yes.
No.
In fact, I think the drivatars are one of the worst AI you could possibly have.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. So,
but I think this is all stuff that you're going to see improved in the next 10 years. Maybe the great word of the day or analogy of the day was the dollar bill. But, these sim developers are dealing with that same dollar bill. And only so many of their resources are going into so many things. And, you think about, even look at the development of iRacing, where you see things that they're working on that keep getting pushed back. And sometimes you got to assume it's because they're difficult. And sometimes it's maybe because they just called off the manpower to have them diverted into something else that is a higher priority today. So they've already spent the buck, and none of that buck is going to go into AI this month, but maybe next month we're going to get back to it. So, I think that AI has always been something that's sort of a back burner topic for sim racing games, and why we've really, to this day, only seen limited AI ability. I mean, for the most part, I can't think of anything where I'm like, oh, that's the AI you race against every day. None of them are really doing that. But I would imagine that we will see massive improvements. We talk about how sim racing and autonomous cars are starting to learn from each other now, and we saw that scenario where the autonomous car company, I can't remember who it was, they bought a full motion, like McLaren racing level simulator in order to run their AI programs, the autonomous vehicle version of it. But we are going to start learning from them too. We're going to start being privy to that coding, that philosophy of processing will start to make its way to us and probably greatly improve our AI as well. That's what I would imagine.
Well, I think we kind of we touched on two different subjects here. We talked about basically Skynet, Rise of the Machines, and
please don't be listening.
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing that, and like I touched on earlier, I'm a motorcycle guy. Yamaha's got a robot that can ride an R1 around a racetrack, and they put Valentino Rossi up against the thing, and it's frightening to watch, really. It's like, wow, I cannot ride as good as that robot can. But if I think, and here's the $1 million idea for you guys watching today, or multi-million-dollar idea, if somebody can come up with a data acquisition AI system that can extrapolate data, they can put a sensor array in a race car and try and get as much data as they can and export that to the sim manufacturers that could possibly lighten up their development load to where they just get this data package and go, okay, here's your physics.
Right.
Slap your graphics on top of it, put the features in that Billy was talking about, your sim pizza. There's a possibility for that, I think.
I might have access to the Robo Race people. Is that somebody we'd ever want to talk to? Sorry to do personal business here on the show. People out there watching the show. I mean, would you want to hear from somebody in the Robo Race world? I mean, this is the biggest threat to racing, maybe. Right. You could argue.
It's the next evolution for Formula E, right? As the autonomous race things and stuff, and short of adding turtle shells, I think we're getting pretty close to it. So,
well, and at what point, I don't know the development on the robot that can ride the R5. Like, can he beat a real racer now? Or no? Not even close, right?
I'm not sure, actually. It might be fascinating to have him on the show and see what we can draw parallels from.
Sure.
Or see if they've used it for development of their actual program, as taking simulator data and see if that overlaps.
Now, is that AI different? So that's, I guess, when I was making my point about the robot jumping in the car. The Robo Race car is processing data it's receiving. I don't know what sensors it actually uses. And then...
I just like that you keep doing this.
And then processing that and then making decisions on what to do with the car. Is that different than AI programmed in? I mean, it is different than AI being programmed into a game. Like the car
breaks my brain.
The robo car is reactionary.
Like my head does not wrap around that concept.
Apparently mine doesn't, because I can't even explain what I'm thinking on it. But maybe they will. Maybe I'll go down and see those guys and see if we can put something together with them.
Yeah, maybe we can chase that up and see. And other than that, I think that's all I had for today. I mean, we're
I think it is
2.5 hours into this deal, and I appreciate
episode 11, and it's our longest episode yet.
I know, it's
so
insane.
That's gonna do it. So that's going to do it for today's show.
Now it's like the fly, man.
Oh, man. What do you guys have coming up? Obviously, we have the 12-hour this weekend. Billy, you got anything in the works for videos or content?
Oh, I don't know. I would like to see if I can get out the Las Vegas video with the rFactor 2 stock cars. I'd actually like to put out one more V8 supercar because Automobilista has a great version of Adelaide, and they've come out with a mod for the V8 supercars in Automobilista that are really fun. I don't know if I'll have time to do that this week. And then next week, I don't know. I think there's WRC Mexico that I'll try to do. And what is it? Is St. Petersburg? Is that this coming weekend? Not this weekend, but the following weekend.
Good question.
So if there's something with that, I might try to get a video out on an IndyCar if I can find a version of St. Petersburg. So yeah, I don't know, stuff like that. Nothing, no more Dirt Rally 2.0 exposés and making some people angry and hashtag exposed.
Fantastic. That sounds good. Shaun, how about you? Is that next level review going to be next level?
The next level review will be out over the weekend, so that's in the works. I'm a little behind on that one, as you all know. Beyond that, Sebring, this week has been just so filled with. I feel selfish. I feel like the show's taking a back seat because I got like Lucky Dog and Sebring and all these things that are just for me. But yeah, it's been all I got on my mind is Sebring. Tomorrow at 5 a.m. 5 a.m. tomorrow. Got to be sharp. Maybe that's the last thing I'll leave you guys
with you in spirit at 5 a.m.
The one thing
for sleeping.
I think the last thought, my final thought, coming off of the lucky dog and having a big race tomorrow. Like we all live really busy lives, and whether you're talking sim racing or other things, I think it's hard to remember how important it is to focus on what is most important at that time. And I find that I often run myself ragged on things, trying to get certain things done before I allow myself whatever else it is that I'm going to do. And don't rob yourself of those moments. I have a good buddy who's about to get a driving opportunity, and he's got to work every day until that test day that he has coming. And I'm like, dude, just whatever you do, make sure you take a step back, take a breath, clear your head, get the rest you need, and don't that day is what's important. All this BS that you have to deal with to get out of town is just BS that you have to deal with. Don't lose sight of the moment, because I kind of did that myself, because I could have practiced for Lucky Dog. I could have driven at on Assetto Corsa at Button Willow. Someone even found Button Willow in race 07 and a Volvo 240. I mean, I could have gotten pretty darn close, and I didn't, because I let life take over, and I didn't recognize the important moment. So anyway, with that, tomorrow is the important moment. It's 12 hours of Sebring, 5 a.m. right here on the Simpit, all 12 hours in our new dual camera perspective. So that'll be pretty cool, pretty cool. And then after that, I'll get back to work.
Until the next thing.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, the next thing. So yeah, that it? That it, everybody?
I think that's it.
I think so.
All right. Well,
thanks for hanging out, everybody.
Yeah, thank you
so much.
Epic show, 2.5 hours. I love it. Great conversation. Thank you, Billy. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Pit Crew. Thank you, everybody out there in YouTube land, for being here and making it fun just to sit here and chat about sim racing each and every day. Get out there, do some racing, and be sure to be ready next week when we ask you what you've been doing, what have you been driving. You better have some good answers. You better tell us what's hot, what's fun, and what you were out there doing yourself.
Uncle Shaun said so.
But that's going to do it for this one. This is the Simpit. I'm Shaun Cole. That's Billy Strange. That's Brandon Waters. And we will see you on the track.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.